Right, so let's make a start. Just a few general housekeeping matters at the outset. First of all, really happy with the level of engagement that I'm getting around the assignment and the questions that people are asking, so please keep them coming. From time to time, if I do get a particularly compelling question, I might ask if it's okay to share it on the forum. I do notice that people seem to prefer email to forum use, which is fine. But from time to time, there are some good things that are raised through email discussion, so I just thought I'd mention that. And you certainly won't be alone if you're to receive a request like that from me. So be mindful of that when you're sending through those questions. I've also been thinking about the assignment and I guess everyone's level of preparedness for this kind of thing. And one of the consistent messages that I am getting is that there are many that have not done something like this before, and there might be a level of consternation within some of you about how to go about writing an assignment of this style, and that's okay. It's very normal to feel that way. It is quite a new thing, and I guess the idea of master's level study is that you will do something new. Albeit I do think that within this cohort perhaps that there are some that may well have never encountered any sort of assignment model whatsoever before. And that can be confronting. It's quite a new thing. And I know there are different models of education in the world, and the Anglo-American model is very driven towards I guess a varied structure of assessment. But I come from a context, and I know many others come from a context where it's almost all exclusively examination based. And it can be quite different and quite confronting doing this for the first time. So to that end, a couple of things. I am going to, perhaps for the first time, give you guys a little bit of assistance around the structure and some of the overall formatting by way of providing you guys with some template guidance. All right, it is a slightly unusual step, but I don't think that it's helping too much. I think that on this occasion it's just a case of getting people up to speed in terms of the approach that they can take. And again, the guidance that I'll be providing will be rather broad, so you'll have to contextualize it appropriately. I know that many of you have already done this and have explored some of the websites that I've shared with you and endeavoured to do it on your own. But for those that haven't, try to use this information as a useful tool in terms of getting you guys going, getting started. It seems like the vast majority are underway and are doing some research and putting together some preliminary material and trying to put some semblance of structure around it. So hopefully this assists you in that regard. All right? So once you receive this, if it helps, great. If you're still finding yourself somewhat challenged by things, I am here, I am available to have a chat about this. I certainly would like to help you and see everyone succeed. All right, that is the hope. And it's not our desire that people don't succeed. So please, again, do feel free to reach out, and now's a good time to do so. Also, on requests for changes of topic, to those of you that have changed your topics multiple times, I'm completely okay with it. I would encourage you to pick one and run with it. The choices were really to try to inspire some independent thought and encourage some innovation around ideation. But at the end of the day, it is still an assessment. So try to pick something that you're comfortable with and try to run with it. I'm not instituting any restriction on who chooses what, so whatever topic you want to choose, it's entirely at your discretion. All right? Even if 10 people have already chosen it. The reason that I try to limit the number of people doing certain topics is because people do tend to, rather inadvertently on occasion, write very similar pieces. And the algorithmic technology that looks at the comparability of assessment is getting very good. And no one actually tells you this, but the system auto-flags similar work. I don't do it. As far as I'm concerned, it may well be by virtue of using comparable resources, you come up with somewhat convergent responses. But the system doesn't really view it that way. And so it generates an auto flag when assignments are similar, and those auto flags are not directed by me to anyone. The faculty is aware of them across all academic subjects. So my way of ameliorating or limiting or trying to sort of protect people from themselves around that subject, and by way of restriction, my goal was to merely protect, I guess, people from themselves around that kind of thing. So it's entirely up to you what you choose, all right? It's entirely up to you what you choose. You can choose whatever you want. You can even choose a subject, as I said, outside of that list. And I'd encourage you to do so. I have approximately 40 unique topics, which is great. It's a huge number. 40 people have said, I'd like to do something different. But in a cohort of in excess of 240, obviously the majority is still going to be doing something from that suggestion list that I put together. So if you are working with someone, I just encourage you to just be mindful of what they're doing too. Okay? Just be a little bit mindful. Have a look at what you're both submitting before you submit it. Just quickly, not because I'm in any way going to be looking over your shoulder, but I'll be frank, the technology will. All right? And about 14 candidates were excluded last year. Not from this subject, but across the second and third level subjects in particular. It's much more of an issue at third year than it is initially within the subjects that I teach. But when I heard that, I thought this would be a good way to try to minimise the potential for that. Okay. So at your discretion, choose what you deem appropriate. Not wanting to create any worry in anyone, because the reality is I've never had a candidate excluded in any one of my programs. Okay? I've taught over 10,000 students, never had a single candidate in my programs excluded. All right, but I know that it is happening because I have colleagues that are telling me that it is. Okay? So just something to be mindful of. All right, so on to slightly more positive matters. I have decided also to give you guys a little bit of an extension with that final date of submission as well. So I'm just going to detail that online, so just be mindful of that. But I would encourage you to still try to submit based on the original date, because you'll get your mark back much more quickly, and you'll get your feedback much more quickly as well. All right, so please look out online for that, and I guess we can continue to sort of talk about your progress around the subject. All right, so a couple of other general things that I'd like to talk about. It seems like, again, everyone's doing reasonably well with the subject. Obviously, we have a test coming up or a simulation coming up in a couple of weeks. So be mindful of that. I'll provide some preparatory questions for you guys to have a go at them prior to doing the final quiz. But as I said, for the most part, it's not going to be terribly different to the things that you've encountered thus far. Not that different to a traditional quiz. It just visually looks a little bit more like a simulation. But in terms of the competencies it's going to be assessing, in terms of how it's going to be assessing you, for all intents and purposes, not that different to a traditional quiz model. All right? So that's something to be mindful of, to keep on your radar. I know people have been seeking clarification from time to time on that. Rest assured, you'll get all the clarification you need, and you get a very substantial test window. So you'll have between weeks 8 and weeks 11 to complete the quiz. In fact, you'll have up until the final census date. All right? As long as I get your data in the quiz framework prior to that final census date, I'll be happy with that. So you can actually treat your quiz as a method or mechanism for preparation for your final exam. All right? So you can use it as a good gauge to sort of look at how well you're tracking for that final paper. All right? I think this next matter you're all going to be rather happy with. Again, I know that many of you are grappling with a substantial amount of content and a large number of items to review, a substantial amount of subject matter to review. So what I'm going to do is make very, very clear that your final examination, okay, is going to be based on all of the lecture materials that we cover off on in class. Okay? So I just want to make that clear. I think a few people are a little bit worried about how much they're going to need to know and how much they'll need to know outside the auspices of the core material that we cover. Because I do cover off on a lot with you all, and I do appreciate that this is your first master's subject. But yes, that represents the scope of your final paper. Okay, so if you know that material well, you should feel very confident coming into your final exam. Okay? That should be how you frame your preparation. Okay? I am going to be encouraging you to read more, and if you ask me what to read, yes, I am going to be encouraging you to do a lot more than just that. but I want you guys to be mindful of that, okay? I think that it will help your mental preparation around the subject, okay? So just treat it with the appropriate respect, due credence, but acknowledge that that is the scope of your assessment. All right, so beyond that, I did want to raise a couple of pragmatic things. I know that everyone's at sort of different stages in terms of their academic and non-academic lives, but for those of you that are applying for associate roles, please be mindful that the associate role programs that are made available through many of the major intermediaries are currently being advertised. So now's the time to actually start applying. For those of you that are from countries abroad and have visa restrictions, you are still able to apply to all of these programs as long as you have the appropriate visa in place upon commencement of your associate program. Okay? So I've had a number of students start associate programs with major investment banks and wealth management funds in recent times. Okay? And you're all in that category as well. I know that it might seem a little bit early because most people get recruited for an associate program in their second final year, but in a master's degree, your second final year is effectively your first year for most of you that aren't doing double masters. All right? So for those of you that are doing a double master's, it's probably a little bit more relevant to next year, but for those of you that are doing a single master's degree, this is something that you need to be thinking about right now. Okay, and the reason that I mention this is because I'm guessing that most of you aren't coming here just for fun. I mean, you might be. I know many people that do this stuff for fun or for personal betterment or because they want to further themselves in the context of the role they're presently in. But I also know, based on actually being one of those weird people that looks at the underlying data around my cohort, that the vast majority are probably seeking out these opportunities. So I actually wanted to ask, is there any worth in us, I do this from time to time, but I do concede that this cohort is probably a little bit, well, I'll just put it out there. Would you guys benefit from us running some sessions where we bring out professionals and recruiters? Would people actually want to meet them? Or would I just, is it not worth my while is what I'm trying to get at? Yeah? Yeah, no, I always love your feedback, Ron, but I want to know if everyone feels as enthusiastic as you, my friend, because I know that you are. Because I guess there's an investment of time and effort in doing that, but being pragmatic about it, how many of you are actually currently seeking associate positions, internships, gainful employment at the moment, and how many of you are honestly not thinking about it? Okay, so about 5% of you are probably actively seeking out opportunities at the moment. Look, that's fine. What I might do, I normally do this for my 760 cohort anyway, so we might combine it, all right, and try to do something with both groups together. I think that might be a compelling thing. Yeah. By the time you get to 760, you'll be thinking about these things, guaranteed. Got a few more subjects under your belt, all right? So let's talk about that a little bit more online and look at whether there's some worth in maybe doing that in a couple of weeks' time, just to sort of really start to get you guys motivated around some of these opportunities. All right, well, look, I trust you all had a good break. Lots of exciting things happening in the world of finance in your absence that are probably worth talking about. Certainly there's lots of interesting acquisition discussion at the moment around a number of major North American enterprises, which is kind of heating up, and certainly a lot of discussions around some interesting venture capital transactions. Some very, very exciting unicorn enterprises have been getting very good funding rounds. So lots of interesting things happening in the world of finance, but in my view, none more interesting than this renewed talk around Brexit. It seems like all of the Brexit discussions seem to be really ramping up again, and I think that there is a small segment of the population that is somewhat hopeful that it won't happen, because I think that there is a real level of fear or a real level of consternation at the moment about the impact of Brexit on the economies of the region. Beyond that, there's been a lot of discussion and conjecture about a number of the policies that have been enacted by the Trump administration around taxation, and also any potential impact on the president's ability to initiate new policy because of the elections in November. So again, lots happening in North America. More close to home, there are some interesting things to talk about as well. So what's being debated in Australian politics at the moment that has major implications for markets? Sorry? That's exactly right. So at the moment, there's a lot of conjecture about the appropriateness of energy policy in this country. What are people's thoughts on that? Energy policy. Yeah, so what are people's thoughts on energy policy and the policies that are being conjectured and the implications of those policies for markets? Because every time something is discussed in the political sphere, what you guys need to start thinking about are the implications for business and markets. All right, so what are some of the plausible implications of this policy? The Andrews government is also talking about its conceivable solution as well. What is being discussed in Victoria? What are we talking about?
Funding solar electricity panels for domestic households.
That's exactly right. So returning to some sort of model to partially fund the solar industry. That's interesting, the story behind solar. In Australia, we were actually some of the world leaders in this technology for a number of decades. In the 80s and 90s, some of the best solar tech in the world came out of Australia. There was a Chinese-Australian family who actually actively championed much of this technology during the earlier stages. Some really innovative Chinese-Australian cohort that really advanced and championed it and actually drove manufacturing even out of Australia. They actually were fabricating solar technologies in Australia. Many of the inverters, many of the composites and components required to build inverters actually came from Australia. But as a result of a lack of support for those technologies, essentially no support being forthcoming by way of government grants and so forth, they had to move all of their manufacturing to China. Okay, and that little-known individual is now one of the 30 wealthiest people in China. Okay, so our history with solar technology in this country is long and somewhat unfortunate in many respects. We now find ourselves really struggling to be relevant in the solar technology space. But we have a real desire to utilize solar technology to advance power generation again. All right, we haven't seen this impetus for some time. What are the implications of this potential policy? What are the implications of the policy that Malcolm Turnbull is conjecturing? All right, well, I'm going to give you my my really quick summary, and then you can let me know. So at present, Malcolm Turnbull is talking about doing what to the price of electricity? What is he talking about doing? Yeah, well, for all intents and purposes, yeah, they're looking to cap energy prices. What happens when you institute a cap within a market that is essentially a free-flowing, unabated market? Albeit, some might argue, a little bit of an oligopoly. Sorry?
Productive consumption of electricity. They won't be wasted. They can reduce the consumption of electricity.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Like segregate like residential and commercial purpose. So like residential they can mark as a limit, like the usage can be limited to a certain extent.
Okay. So the caps are price caps. They're price caps. So what does a price cap do? So how does the market operate in India and how does the market operate in China? Anyone?
But agreed. And there's a very complex step model in place in India around utilisation. It's varied through time, but at present there are 12 price increments, 12 steps in terms of incremental pricing in India to ensure that those that don't have much money are impacted the least by prices. So there are a number of caps in place in relation to access. My apologies, not access. In relation to access pricing is probably a better way to put it. All right, so India has a very, very fair model. It wouldn't work otherwise. If everyone paid the same price for power in India, the poorest of the poor would really struggle to access power. All right? Equally, those that are incredibly wealthy, and by any standard there are some incredibly wealthy people in India, would be able to access power at minuscule prices relative to their income. Okay. There are over 1 million high net worth millionaires in India. Okay? So this policy ensures that people are accessing energy at appropriate prices. And because India's model is a very regional model when it comes to power generation, there aren't the same risks attaching to implementing this model generally. What's the difference between that model and the model that's being talked about locally? We're talking about capping prices for all intents and purposes much more consistently across the board. And so what would happen then?
Basically, it just restricts the growth of the energy providers because you know the outcome, so that's what's going to be charged per consumer per household.
That's perfect. For those of you playing at home, it basically restricts the trajectory and the profitability of the providers such that we're actually actively diminishing the incentives that are in place for them. It might force efficiencies. I mean, in an ideal world, it might force efficiencies to afford them or allow them to generate greater margins, but these are retailers. So the inefficiencies will come from staff losses. They're not going to come from any other source. They're not going to come from generation, per se. What will it do to the share prices of these companies? Has anyone been tracking that? This is a really obvious market scenario. What's happening to their share prices at the moment? You think everyone's jumping in going, "Hoi, we know what we're going to earn. Let's get in there." No, they're not. They're concerned. And these are fairly efficient companies for the most part. Some of them even do some generation, companies like Origin and so forth. They're fairly diversified. But in saying that, they're all taking a little bit of a hit because everyone is concerned that there is going to be a restriction placed on their profit potential. Yep.
Is that what happened to the German power market, the energy supply market? Like the old sort of German.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. Germany and Japan are very, very different because this is going to sound really, really odd, but their share market is not really a true share market, and neither is the market in Japan, just because of the Volkerbond, the Uber bank model, the giant bank model. The banks effectively control everything, and so when quirky things happen in their market, the stock markets tend to be far more resilient because institutional shareholders lead almost all decision making. So if you look at Allianz, Dresdner and Deutsche, I mean, they control huge amounts of equity. So they tend to be far less reactionary markets. It's weird like that. I mean, Japan is kind of similar. Japan isn't to that same extreme. If you were to sort of look at a spectrum, sort of a banking spectrum, you would have Germany there, and you would have Japan in the middle, and you would have Australia, the US, and the UK kind of over here. Our banks don't really participate in markets that much. There are external observers kind of standing aside from markets and observing what's going on. In Japan, by virtue of they have a kiratsu model, whereby every member of a family cooperative entity owns 5% of every other. They placed a 5% ownership restriction on their institutions such that the market has evolved in such a way that you'll have 20 to 40 enterprises within an enterprise model, each owning 5% of every other enterprise in that model. And so again, you don't see any sort of remarkable price adjustments there relative to other markets. I mean, they do happen, but it's very, very different. Whereas here, because our banks operate somewhat independent of market, we don't see major reactions, major revisions. But in saying that, we're almost a case study in and of ourselves, because we have this remarkable quirk insofar as we have major institutional investment coming from superannuation. So you would think that our markets would perhaps react less than others, but by virtue of the participation of general investors in our market, it kind of overrides the institutional participation. So yeah, Germany is a little bit different. Yeah, so what I want you guys to sort of really start thinking about is the fact that every single political decision, every single economic decision that's being made by government has implications for markets. At present, all of the companies that are involved in solar energy, how do I put it, infrastructure reselling to residential units and residential property, and all of the parties that are involved in, I guess, the procurement of offset credits and generate revenues through offset credit collection are going to be really, really happy, okay? And all of the people that are actively involved in energy retailing are going to be really, really upset, okay? So that's the reality of our market at present. In terms of other key economic decisions, well, there haven't been too many that have been as hotly debated as these ones. What we're going to do now is essentially talk about how government decision-making, and indeed independent central reserve decision-making, impacts upon the activities of the firm. Okay. So, if you could pull out your lecture notes, we'll make a start. So in today's discussion, we're going to be focusing our attention on monetary policy. This is the type of topic that is examined theoretically in almost every installment of this course. It's an important one because for all intents and purposes, this is really where you're going to be getting your inculcation of monetary policy. It used to be covered much more in economics courses, but not so much. So now, what was once effectively half of an economics course is now essentially 1 week of a modern finance course. It's just the way that the world has changed, and we've refocused our attention on different matters. But this is incredibly important stuff. Some of you might see this as remarkably simple, all right? Okay, so the machination that happens in relation to interest rates, in relation to the payment system, in relation to the purchase or sale of government securities, it might seem like an overly simplistic discussion. But the reality is, any sort of simple statement about the operation of markets and monetary policy belies the complexity that exists here. A huge number of Nobel Prize winners have won for the work they've contributed to discussions around monetary policy. You know, you think for argument's sake about Irving Fisher as an example, all right? His work in this category is the reason that he was one of the first financial economists to win a Nobel Prize. So this stuff, it might seem simple, but there is a lot to it, all right? I'd encourage you guys to ask as many questions as you need to as we progress through this material, because being able to articulate what happens when a government initiates a particular monetary policy program is important. You'll actually be examined on it in this course, and you'll then be examined on it in 2 later courses, even though you don't cover it. So it's covered in 703, 759, and 760. All right, so if you learn it well now, you won't need to relearn it when you do those courses. All right, so monetary policy, the payment system, and government securities. Key focuses for today's discussion: we're going to discuss why governments borrow, the main features of government debt. We're going to be pricing key government securities, so we're going to be pricing T-notes and T-bonds. And we're going to discuss monetary policy, interest rates, and the payment system. Okay. Before I proceed, how many of you guys have been tracking the changes that have been enacted around the world with respect to international payment systems? A lot's been happening in this sphere, hasn't it? So, before we progress into today's material, just as an aside, what is happening to our payment system right now? Has anyone been following this in the media? Yep. Yes. That's exactly right. So you might remember at the start of the course I was talking about the fact that the media will jump onto this soon. And so the media has been talking about this recently, haven't they? The fact that we now have a new payment system. Okay? Our payment system, the one that we've recently enacted, is not dissimilar to the payment system in the United Kingdom. All right? So we've modelled our framework on the framework that was enacted there. And equally, both of our payment systems do draw heavily from the US model. But what's remarkable is that our model and the model in the UK are effectively going to be closer to real time than the model enacted in the US. It's kind of remarkable, don't you think? That's a real advantage. Why is that an advantage, do you think? I'll get into the technicalities of it later when we get to that discussion, but why is that an advantage, and why would you want to rather excitedly be looking at fintech providers locally? It's always great when your economy enacts a system or a framework first when it comes to innovation, because all of the firms that sit around this change get to interact with that innovative layer first. All right? They get to build systems and platforms, frameworks, regtech to account for this new approach to financial services. And so all of these incumbent players and these emerging firms are now having to grapple with a new payments framework that is going to be close to real time. They're going to have to create overarching and overlay technologies that interact with these APIs at appropriate speed. Okay? This is very, very different to the model that's enacted within most countries around the world. How do payments occur, and with what frequency in other jurisdictions? So when you make a payment in China from one bank to another bank, how long does the transfer take? And in India, for argument's sake? Yeah, best case scenario is one day. I come from India and I love India. The payment system there scares me a little. Sometimes, you look at your bank account and you're really hopeful, when you make a transfer. No, that's not true at all. The Indian system is actually a very good system, but it's based on the original UK model. Okay, and the original UK model allowed for intraday netting, normally at best on a 12-hourly basis. Okay, and that was the model that we had too. All right, so when it came to India and Australia and China, the models were almost identical. So in China, kind of the same. Yeah, how frequently does the system net? I don't transact as much there, but anyone help me out? Pretending that I don't know so you can interject and say something. So it's a very, very similar system. Very, very similar system in terms of netting. All right, it's not real time, is it? So when you do a transfer to your mate in China, all right, does he get the money within 30 seconds? No, right? So this is a remarkable shift. It's a seminal shift. So much so that I'm actually trying to get the team behind this technology to come out and talk to you guys. Because you guys have this really great opportunity to actually build technology around this new payment system. Seriously. It's remarkable. And when those systems are enacted within foreign jurisdictions, what do you then get to do? That's exactly right. Take that technology straight back. Okay, so it's a really exciting time. It's a really, really interesting time. So our new payment system will be close to real time. It'll support transfer based on mobile phone number, based on email address, and based on payment ID. Okay? So you won't need to provide people with a BSB, an account number. Okay? And for international transfers, people will still need to nominate a SWIFT code, or if they nominate a payment ID, or, for argument's sake, an email address, they won't need to nominate a SWIFT code because the payment ID will automatically link to a bank and a relevant SWIFT identifier. Okay? That's pretty remarkable. Just think about how that change is going to impact economies around the world when they enact comparable systems. It has already started. So you guys can go out, you can get regulatory approval now. I can help you get it. If you want a regulatory exemption to build some RegTech, you can go out and do it. I will seriously help you. I will give you all the help you need. Okay? So the other cool thing that the government has done, and they've availed us to, is they've actually created a new regulatory sandbox. It is a world-first piece of legislation that allows for a 100-day exemption to test technology. Okay? An AFSL exemption for 100 days to test new and compelling technology. That's how important they know this time is. This is a seminal time for our economy, and it's a seminal time for innovators. All right? So, something to think about after you've done your assignment. All right. So, we're going to be talking about the payment system today, but arguably the payment system is one of those sort of often forgotten aspects of an economy. Okay, the payment system is an important system, and more often than not, within most jurisdictions, the payment system is moderated by the Central Reserve or the Reserve Bank. So in China, in India, in Australia, in the US, okay, the Central Reserve plays a critical role in the context of all of those payment systems. In the US, it's a little bit different. The SEC is involved as well, but for the most part, there's a comparable model around the world. But arguably, the most important thing that any given government does in the context of its payment system and indeed the broader economy is to moderate expenditure in the context of the payment system, to moderate transfers in the context of the payment system, to ensure system stability and system viability by making sure the payment system works well. If your payment system doesn't work well, no one trusts you. All right? So restricting the payment system can cause consternation as well. Let's take a moment and consider what's happening in Argentina. What's happening in Argentina at the moment with respect to their payment system and transfer system? Okay, anyone from Argentina in the room? I have a lot of friends from Argentina. I love Argentinian food. They do good barbecue. You wouldn't think that. We Australians, we think we do the best barbecue. And we probably do, but they do good barbecue as well. In addition to that, they've also contributed huge amounts to various intellectual disciplines. Some of the greatest economic theorists, some of the greatest social theorists, some of the greatest authors in history come from Argentina. And they were a very advanced economy. They were the fourth largest economy, probably at the turn of the 18th century. Okay? Fourth largest in the world. Where do they rank now? I know, it's sad. It's sad when you think about this stuff. I have friends in the region. Well, they're certainly not fourth anymore. Let's just put it that way. Okay? One of the real challenges for Argentina was sort of grappling with change and instituting change because they achieved such great success so early in their stages of social and economic development, very, very early in their overall social history. And as a consequence of that, they became a very regulation-driven economy. Even though they had some of the most advanced systems in the world, they were heavily regulated. I've heard an academic author in Argentina talk about how many documents need to be completed to transfer apples from one side of the country to another. Approximately 14. There are 14 compliance rules in relation to the transference of apples. Okay? So it should come as no surprise, their financial system was one of the most regulated. And everyone thought, well, isn't that remarkable? Look how advanced they are. They've got all of these great regulations in place. Their payment system was the most heavily regulated payment system in the world. But what did people discover? It really cloistered and restricted innovation. Okay? So in Argentina, one of the most damaging things about their payment system is that you have restrictions placed on the quantity of capital that can be transferred through the payment system. Substantial restrictions. And you also have restrictions placed on how much capital can be transferred abroad or can be accepted from abroad. Why do you think those laws were enacted in relation to their payment system? Yeah, look, that was an unhelpful time, undeniably. But I think the reason that underlying the capital restriction was quite clear. They just wanted to ensure that there wasn't too much foreign capital flowing into the country, influencing economic outcomes, economic trajectories, and truth be told, they were also very, very concerned about the value of their currency. And so they thought by restricting their payment system, restricting transfers, and restricting the transfer of capital into the country, it would make their currency more stable. What happened? Did that work? No, it didn't really work out. All right? So they're a really good case example when you look at the activities of government and how indeed government has to be so careful when enacting laws in relation to expenditure and their payment system. All right. So why do governments borrow? Why do governments borrow? Because they have expenditure needs as well. All right? They have expenditures they need to account for. And they will frequently run deficits. During periods of economic decline, the government may well run a deficit. It needs to fund that deficit somehow. But there are other reasons as well. In countries like Spain, and unfortunately to a greater extent in countries like Greece, why do they borrow? Oh, look, I would agree that they have put a substantial amount of money into social welfare, but so has Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. They put far more into social welfare. So what else might we put it down to? Yes. Yeah, so that's a big part of it. The Greek economy doesn't produce a great deal anymore. And I offer the following disclaimer that Greece has contributed more to democracy and modern thought than any other economy or country in the world. So everything is offered with that qualifier. But the reality is modern Greek economic policy has been less than ideal. And they've been very anti any type of austerity, any type of, restriction, which to an extent makes some sense. They received a lot of criticism for that. And I wouldn't put their current position down to the lack of austerity either. What are some other possible reasons? Well, 1 in 5, nearly 1 in 4 people in Greece is employed by the public sector. When you have such a substantial amount of public sector employment, it's a real problem. But in my view, one of the least discussed and one of the most critical issues is the Grecian attitude towards tax receipting. All right? You need to consider the history that underlies this. There is a complex history at work here. You know, during a number of eras, substantial eras in their social and economic history, they were at the behest of other economic powers. And so any remittance that they made didn't remain within their system. And so there's a historical aversion to tax receipting. That aside, no, I know that no one wants to pay tax, all right? But it seems like Greek people like to pay tax less than everyone else. And so, sorry? Well, yeah, they're really good at it. So I guess tax receipting plays a really, really big part in your ability to do what? The consistency of your tax receipting is really critical to what? I know this feels like an economics class right now. Okay, but finance is economics. They're one and the same. These decisions impact markets. They impact our decisions. Income consistency has been a problem. Yeah? Yeah, but per capita incomes in a number of other countries in the region have at times been lower than Greek per capita income. But the consistency of tax remittances determines your ability to engage in any complex planning exercise. If you don't have consistent tax remittances to underlie your decision-making, it's very, very hard to make long-term decisions and fund them. And so they've always struggled with remittance consistency. Compare that with our system. The Australian system is such that it's very hard to avoid taxation, okay? And if you do, you normally get in trouble for it, okay? Tax receipting in this country is incredibly consistent, all right? How frequently do you think Greece uses their short-term debt facility relative to Australia? Well, we've used our facility twice in 10 years to fund intertemporal financial needs, short-term funding needs. The Greek facility has been used concurrently throughout that entire equivalent period in history. All right? It makes things much easier when you can rely upon your tax remittances. Okay, it makes spending much more straightforward. You don't need to borrow as much because you know what's coming in and you can plan. So the leaders in this country have an inherent advantage because they get consistent tax remittances that they can utilise. Do you know the only reason we really issue T-bills in this country is for what reason, for all intents and purposes? Why do we issue my apologies, I'm using the American term. Why do we issue T-notes in this country? Yeah, it's to define zero risk to an extent, but the reason that underlies it, in fact, is in many respects even simpler than that. It's just because we want to maintain a market. We just issue them just so various financial intermediaries can interact with that market, and we can maintain the market's existence. But we don't really use the market in the way that it was originally intended because our tax remittances are so consistent in this country. They're very, very predictable. If I go about predicting tax remittances in both countries, if I was to use one of my neural net models, try to predict the outcome, the predictive accuracy within an economy like Australia relative to Argentina or Greece, it's hard to fathom just how different it is. Okay, well, I would say that Japan, South Korea, and Australia are remarkable case in points when it comes to tax remittance. The US taxation policy can change quite markedly from economic leadership cohort to economic leadership cohort. So they have probably had less remittance consistency than we have. We also do have a very heavily regulated market, and we also do have very high rates of taxation. I should let that be known as well. So in Australia, we pay some of the highest rates of taxation of any OECD member. Okay, if we were to look at the OECD in terms of tax payments on a per capita basis, per head basis, we pay more than most do relative to income. Whether that's a good thing or not is a discussion for another day. All right. So any discussion of tax receipting and payments is referred to, or is often referred to, as a discussion of fiscal policy. Okay? So when we're having this discussion, we're having a discussion of fiscal policy. All right. These are some of the other reasons that governments borrow. They frequently roll over bonds that are maturing as well. Okay? And sometimes we'll try to retire surplus outstanding debt. The debt in Australia is very, very popular. The vast majority of Australian debt is held by whom? Who buys the vast majority of the issued government securities? Sorry? So you would think that the majority of these securities are held by domestic banks, but they're actually held by foreign central banks and by foreign banks. They're very popular securities. Very, very popular. Our banks do hold a substantial portion, very, very close to the majority, normally around 40%, but 60% is held by foreign central banks. So who do you think are two of the largest holders of Australian securities at present who are banking on us? That's exactly right. China loves Australian Commonwealth Government securities, have changed their portfolio structure dramatically in recent years and have moved away from a number of US-based securities to Australian securities. Okay? Very popular. And India as well. The Indian Central Bank and the Chinese Central Bank are two of the largest holders of Australian government securities. All right. So, the government will issue $5 billion worth of Treasury bonds each year regardless of need. All right? So our minimum, when you look at the data, if you're ever looking at this and you're wondering why they're issuing such a small quantum of bonds, but they continue to issue them, it's just to ensure that the market exists, as I mentioned. This is true of both bonds and bills. Okay. So it's probably worth talking about the crowding out effect very, very briefly. The crowding out effect refers to the notion that if governments issue too much debt, it discourages people investing in the private sector. We've not really observed any substantial crowding out effect in our market. All right, there's always been strong interest in both government and non-government securities. Okay, so when it comes to within-year borrowing, as I said, our needs have been rather infrequent because we've generally been able to rely upon our note issuances. But during the GFC, yes, we did use both our bond facility and our bill facility to raise funds to stimulate the economy. Okay? Our economic stimulus program in per capita terms was the third largest in the OECD and the second most efficacious and effective. Okay, so something to be mindful of. Some might argue ours was the most effective. When you consider how effectual something is, it's important to appreciate it's really subjective. And so during that time in our economic history, it's contended that we were either first or second most resilient, depending on how you want to interpret the credit metrics. South Korea was also very well performed. They were the other economy in that discussion. So all of those people that were very critical of Kevin Rudd, all right, you all owe him an apology because we now have the data. All right. So we're now going to talk a little bit about Treasury bonds and Treasury notes. What I'm going to convey is very, very important. If you know how to value a government bond, you know how to value a corporate bond. The price mechanics are exactly the same. If you know how to value a Treasury note, you know how to value a bank bill. The price mechanics are exactly the same. So if you learn this well now, when we repeat this in the context of private market discussions over the course of the next few weeks, it'll be remarkably straightforward. All right. So how do we go about valuing a bond? And this is particularly important, so please pay careful attention. A bond is almost like, and this is a crude analogy, okay, but it should help. A bond is almost like a tradable investment loan. Okay? You probably know how investment loans work. If you were able to trade one, the mechanics of its pricing would be almost identical to the mechanics of a bond's pricing. Okay? A bond's value is made up of two constituent components. All right? Think of that investment loan example. When it comes to an investment loan, you have the repayment of principal and you have a series of defined payments. A bond's value is constituted exactly the same way. When you buy a bond, you are essentially buying an entitlement to a series of coupon payments, some might describe them as dividend payments, and the repayment of principal at maturity. Okay, so a bond has two constituent components. The number of coupon payments and the length of the bond govern its interest rate sensitivity. Okay? Think about that for a moment. The more payments there are attaching to a bond, the more payments that can be impacted by a change in interest rates. So the longer the bond, the more coupons attaching to the bond, the greater its interest rate sensitivity. So longer bonds, all things being equal, will respond more to changes in interest rates than shorter bonds will, even if they're trading at the same initial yield, even if they're trading at the same initial price. Okay? So, up until 1984, they were bearer bonds or inscribed stock. What does that actually mean? Well, quite simply, if you possess the physical bond, you are entitled to its underlying benefits. Okay? So it means that if you were to find, for example, a bond notice on the street that had its coupons attaching, you would be entitled to all of the economic benefit that derives from that bond. They were a bearer security. But we obviously moved away from that model for a very obvious reason. It facilitated tax evasion and money laundering. All right? If there was no way to attach them or link them to an individual or cohort, people were going to use them inappropriately. So we moved to an inscribed stock model, and now all of these securities are tracked electronically. I think I've used my... Have I talked to you guys? I think I probably have. Have you guys seen the movie Mission Impossible 1? One of the few examples of a bearer bond that you'll see in a movie. Do you remember when Tom Cruise and John Voight are having that fight on the train? They're fighting over a briefcase, right? And the briefcase flies open and all those little pieces of paper fly out. They were bearer bonds. It's finance. They were teaching the world about finance. All right, so they were having a fight over those bearer bonds because whoever had those bearer bonds was entitled to the economic benefit, even if they were stolen, because there's no way of proving it. So you can still, within many jurisdictions around the world, buy bearer bonds. Okay? In fact, you can buy them in the US, you can buy them in Japan over the counter. In Japan, you can buy them at the post office. In the US, you can buy them at any local bank. And they're a very popular gift. Okay? You guys seen that episode of Seinfeld? Give someone a... No more popular culture today? All right, so they do exist and they are very popular. We've just never really had an appetite for them in this country. I don't know why, because I think that we appreciate being able to give someone an economic benefit, but we've never really gotten into them. They also do exist in India too. What's an example of a use of a bearer bond in India? How are they used in India? What do you use them for in India? So if you're drawing up an important contract in India, okay, particularly if it's in one of the northern states, what kind of paper might you print it on? Yeah. So what is stamp paper actually? It's not really stamp paper. What is it? That's exactly right. It's a bearer bond. That stamp paper that you've been using all these years that everyone calls stamp paper, they're effectively bearer bonds. And why do we use them? It makes the contract look pretty cool. That's for sure, because it has a little hologram on there.
To make the contract legal.
That's exactly right. The contract is still legal without that, but in India, people like the old Elizabethan law that used to actively encourage the use of this type of security when engaging in the construction and execution of a formal contract. All right. So in England, they don't do that anymore, but in India, they've retained that love for using bond paper for writing contracts. So I always like contracts in India because they always just look a little bit different to contracts everywhere else. For those of you that have not been to India or ever entered into a contract there, you can get printed bearer bonds that have little holographic insignias on them quite frequently. And you print all of your contracts on them because it deems the contract to be more lawful by virtue of the fact there's consideration attaching to the paper. Okay? So I've had to do this many, many times, and I enjoy it to this day. I want to bring this to Australia, you know, this use of $2 and $3 bearer bonds to write contracts. All right.
Why do bearer bonds still exist? And the way that they can be abused?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, like bank bills, they're this important historical artifact that people continue to use, and there would need to be some substantial changes within a number of jurisdictions to make them unlawful. But they probably should be. Yeah, they really should be. All right, so the rules in relation to how they're purchased have changed somewhat. Used to be able to use a cash or conversion loan approach up until 1980. This is just for knowledge sake. This is how it works now. We have a tender system. It used to be a tap system, a continuous offering. As with all things, they work better through tender. Well, actually, I should probably define those terms. What is a tender system? Have you guys ever encountered a tender system in terms of sale? Tender systems tend to work best when it comes to selling complex goods because it affords people sufficient time to review the good or service and then lodge, more often than not, a sealed private tender bid. Why do we use a tender system when it comes to these securities? Well, it ensures that the securities that benefit government most are issued first to the parties that are prepared to pay the most. Okay? So the tender system is superior to the direct selling system because with a direct selling system, you have to have declared terms, very fixed declared terms. But with a tender system, you can say, this is essentially what we're opening up expressions of interest for. Please lodge a formal tender if you would like something. And then you only assign the bids that are most economically beneficial first. Okay? So everything is done through tender now. Okay. 68% of all securities are held by other central banks. How are they bought and sold? How are they bought and sold? Quite simply, they are bought and sold through private transactions between individuals and institutions off-market. All of this discussion of on-market that happens within most textbooks is kind of nonsense. The only reason they are ever listed on exchange is just so the security has visibility, just so you can market them. But 90% of all transacting happens off exchange. Okay, no one's trading $100,000 to $500,000 securities on exchange. It's just not how the world works. Okay? But it's good in terms of brand building. All right. Why do people love these securities? People love these securities because they often meet liquidity needs under payment system rules. All right? So if you're a bank, this is a particularly attractive security because it gives you yield and it provides you with certain benefits under Basel II. Under Basel III, the benefits diminish somewhat, but it's still a very beneficial security. Okay? So it's vastly superior to holding a corporate equivalent. Obviously, you don't get much yield, though. That's the trade-off. You're getting the lowest conceivable yield within a market. That leads us to a very important rule. I mean, it was raised at the beginning, and it's a really good thing that it was raised at the outset. But how do we use the yield that attaches to a bond? What do we define that as within most jurisdictions? Yep. Yeah, your zero risk rate or your risk-free rate. Okay? So we use this as our proxy for a risk-free rate. So when you're doing financial services research and you want a minimum yield expectation, this is the security that you use. Or you can use a T-note. What's really interesting about that is, for all intents and purposes, people do that theoretically, but when it comes to the real world, they forget that rule. All right? Every security in every market that you trade should yield more than the zero rate in that market, the zero risk rate in that market. So within Australia, every security on the securities exchange should yield more than this. Every other debt security should yield more than this. Okay? So why is this seminal rate so important? Well, this is your baseline expectation. And so that means when this baseline expectation changes, so too should the price of every security in the market. That's why we wait with bated breath on any monetary policy decision, any declaration in relation to monetary policy, because every asset price should change as a result. All right. So this is the notation that you'll see in most economics texts. So those of you that are studying the other finance course, you might see this notation. It's just high-level notation. We don't use it in the real world. Okay? It's simply saying the price is the present value of coupons plus the present value of face value. Okay? So this is how we price them. Please familiarize yourself with this one. Okay? This is an important formula for you all. You will receive this in your final exam, this formula. So you don't need to rote learn it, but remember the context, remember how to use it. You'll note that there appear to be two distinct formulas within one that is bracketed together. All right, so the first part, the bracket 1 minus 1 plus I to the minus n on I, you'll remember that from your earlier studies as your annuity formula. Your annuity formula. That's how we value a sequence of payments of the same value over a defined interval. That is your annuity formula. Present value of an annuity. Everyone remember that one? Okay? If you haven't seen it before, this is one that we will use a lot in this course. Okay, so you'll be using this annuity formula to value bonds, and you'll also be using it to value loans, to determine the present value of a term loan. So when you use a mortgage calculator on a website, that's the formula that's running in the background. Okay? So you'll be using it on at least 2 occasions in this course in your final assessment. So let's go through the formula briefly. C denotes coupon. I'm going to tell you this very important rule at the outset. If you remember this, you will not make a mistake. C must always be a dollar value. It is not a rate. It must always be a dollar value. Okay? When you're given a coupon rate in a question, and you will be, when you do encounter scenarios like that in this course or others, and you certainly will, what do you need to remember? I take that percentage coupon rate to find a notional dollar value. And I then forget about the rate. Okay? I don't need to worry about the rate in rate terms. Once I've found my notional dollar value, I set it aside. Why am I telling you this? Because the most commonly made mistake involves people using the coupon rate and market rate interchangeably. All right? At least 35% of students will do that. Okay? I'm hoping by telling you this that you won't do it. Okay? You only use a dollar value. So that dollar value is multiplied by 1 minus 1 plus I to the minus n on I. It seems like a really complicated formula, but all that formula is doing is it's simplifying a geometric series. Let's say, for example, we had 10 $100 payments over the next 10 years. We could value those by discounting each of them individually back to the present day, couldn't we? Okay? We divide the first one by 1 plus I. The next one is divided by 1 plus I to the power of 2. Next one is divided by 1 plus I to the power of 3. So on and so forth. All right? Until we get to the 10th year. Or we can simplify that series and we end up with this. That is all this equation is doing. Okay? You don't need to know the mathematical derivation. You just need to appreciate that's what it's doing. So, we multiply that dollar value by the annuity factor. That gives us what? It gives us the value of the coupons. Okay? We then need to figure out what the value of the final payment is, the return of the principal, the repayment of the principal to us. And we do that simply by multiplying the principal value by 1 plus I to the power of minus n. What I like about this version of the formula, this is the US SEC RBA version. You will see other versions online. Okay? This version minimizes error. Okay, you can use the other one that's used popularly in a number of textbooks, but there are more potential points of error. Okay, because you're essentially dragging out another set of factors to the front. The only reason I'm drawing that to your attention is because I know that you will encounter that in other courses. All right, it gives you an identical answer. They're mathematically the same. This one just involves fewer steps. Okay? This last bit is important in the context of your broadest understanding of the course and of this security, but you will not be examined on 1 plus I to the k adjustments at this level. Okay, what is a 1 plus I to the k adjustment? That's an adjustment that acknowledges the fact that if you buy a bond on a non-coupon day, you will have accrued some interest in the next coupon. Okay? You would have accrued some interest in the next coupon. Think about it this way. If you buy a bond on a coupon day, and for all intents and purposes, if it's a semi-annual security, there'll only be 2 in the year, on those days, you get the economic benefit attaching to the bond, and there's no accrued entitlement in the next coupon because you have the complete distance between that coupon date and the next coupon date. But even if 1 day has passed after that date, you have accrued some interest in the next coupon. Okay? So bond prices are probably best described as being like a sawtooth. Okay, you might have heard that expression before when it comes to price trajectories. A sawtooth shape means that a bond's price is always rising as it accrues interest in the next coupon, all things being equal, and then on the final day of that coupon entitlement, it drops back by the full value of that coupon. So let's say you have a $1,000 bond trading at par, paying 10% coupons annually, $100 coupons annually. Okay? On the final coupon date, that bond should be worth $1,100. Okay? As soon as that coupon is paid and there's no entitlement to it, the price should drop to $1,000. And with each passing day, you accrue interest in that $100, such that it rises from $1,000 back to $1,100, assuming that it consistently trades at par. Okay. So in this course, we will be valuing them on coupon days, but you won't be required to make a day count adjustment. And the reason for this is because under exam conditions, I know it's very, very hard for everyone to remember how many days are in given months in given monthly sequences, particularly with mid-month day counts. Okay? And I don't want to assess people's knowledge of being able to do day counts under exam conditions, because people, even very good students, frequently make mistakes with day counts. You have to be inclusive of the first day. There are certain things that you need to remember. So we're going to do examples that involve these day counts, and we're also going to do some examples that don't involve these day counts. Okay? But in your final paper, you just need to be familiar with everything within the initial bracketed terms. All right. So let's do an example. Okay, this is going to highlight the frustration that some of you will have with this day count issue. All right? That's fine. It makes life fun. All right, so we have a bond, has a face value of $1,000, pays 7% per annum half-yearly coupons, maturing 15th November 2009. Assume that the bond is sold on the 15th July 2006. So I've given you two interval dates that you should be familiar enough with. The current yields for similar Treasury securities are 8%. Calculate the price of the bond. Okay, so what are we doing? Well, what we need to do first and foremost is figure out the intervals. Okay, I encourage people to do that at the beginning, figure out the intervals. Okay, so what is 6 months from the 15th of November? Count back. With Excel, this is really easy, I know. You just use the date features, and it's much harder to do the counts when you have to do them using mental arithmetic. What I used to encourage people to do was I would encourage them to write all the days of the number of days in each month of the year along the side of their page when they get into their exam. Okay? You won't have to do that because you won't be doing day count-based questions, but that's what I would encourage you to do. Once you've done that, you literally just draw lines at your interval dates, and you do counts in between. Okay? Okay, so where does my 184 come from in this example? Where does the 184 come from? Okay, so is anyone actually doing this? You're just waiting for me to give you the answer. Let's get into the habit of it. I mean, as I said, it's good practice regardless of the style of question that you see. When you do later subjects, you will be doing all of these adjustments. Okay? Just not at this stage. All right, so let's count back together. It's an interactive bunch. I'm going to buy an Anthony Robbins DVD online. I'm going to bring it into class, and you're going to watch him the first 15 minutes of every session. All right? Going to run out and change the world afterward. So let's count back. 15th October, 15th September. Sorry? Thank you. I appreciate that. You didn't make me do that. I appreciate that. So 15th May is our critical date. Thank you so much. So between 15 May and 15 November, how many days are there? Sorry? 6 months, but yes. Do you know the great thing about this? In most markets around the world, you do it this way, but in the US, they have this fantastic rule, just 360 days. All US securities are priced on a 360-day calendar. Just because no one can be bothered doing this in America. It's very smart. It's true, you have to actually make an adjustment. If you're comparing a US security with an Australian security, you have to adjust for that day count variation. Very annoying. But I do ask them quite frequently, my American colleagues, where those days have gone. You know, as much as the math is very easy, No. It's 184. So the problem is you have some days with 30, some days with 31. On this occasion, the interval is 184. Then the number of elapsed days between 15 May, 15 July is 61. That's where we get 61 on 184. Okay? What about the rest of it? So we have 2006 to 2009. So we effectively have 7 intervals. Okay? 7 intervals. Not years, 7 intervals. 7 half-yearly intervals. And an adjustment for an accrued interest in 61 of 184 days. So let's do the calculation. Reading from it again. Face value, $1,000 pays, and this is the most important thing. This is where 35% of mistakes are made. Face value of 1,000 pays 7% per annum half-yearly coupons. Okay, so 35% of students will put 7% into the equation. 20% of students will consider, actually not so much 20%, around 15% will unfortunately not adjust to reflect the compounding frequency. Okay, so what are the 2 things you need to remember to do? Well, I see $1,000 and I see 7%, all right? So first of all, I know I need a dollar value. So 1,000 by 7% is $70. But then I need to acknowledge that it's half yearly in terms of compounding frequency. So rather than being $70 annually, it's $35 semi-annually. If it was quarterly, I'd divide it again. Okay? But it's $35 per half-yearly interval. Okay? The bond is sold 15th July 2006. Current yields for similar bonds are 8%. This is the next critical element. Okay? Current yields or market yields are always our discount factors. Current yields and market yields are always our discount factors. Please don't switch the coupon rate and the market rate. When it says market yield, you use that for discounting. Your coupon rate is only used to find the dollar value of your coupon that you need to discount back to the present day. All right, so it's 1 minus 1.04 to the power of minus 7 on 1.04. That gives us $210.07. Okay? It isn't very much. Why isn't it very much? Because there aren't that many coupons left. We're approaching maturity. Okay? On July 15, 2009, I'll only have 1 coupon left. Okay? So that value will actually decline through time. What will go up through time? The principal component, because I'm getting closer to it. So as I get closer to maturity, the principal component becomes more relevant to my valuation than the coupon component. And this is the first rule of bond trading, that first rule of interest rate sensitivity. The closer we get to maturity, the shorter the bond, the less interest rate sensitive. Why? Because there are fewer coupons. We use the term Macaulay's duration or modified duration to measure the interest rate sensitivity of the bond. That is not something that we examine at this level, but it is something that I want you to be aware of. So the interest rate sensitivity of the bond is frequently described as its tipping point or balancing point. We look at how shifts in interest affect price. And the shorter the bond, the less affected. The longer the bond, the more affected. So this is where we bring monetary policy back into our discussion. Okay? Let's bring monetary policy back into our discussion. We now understand that longer bonds are more interest rate sensitive and shorter bonds are less interest rate sensitive. So if we anticipate a decline in interest rates, what type of asset shifting should we do? What type of asset should we consider if we're considering bonds or an alternative? If we consider a decline in interest rates, if we're anticipating rates going down, how should that affect our bond trading? Undeniably, risk is relevant. Undeniably, you are 100% correct. But setting aside that matter of risk, we're trading bonds now, comparable bonds, let's say comparable risk classification, okay, to keep things simple. If we anticipate rates are going to decline, what type of bonds should we be shifting into? Short bonds or long bonds? Long bonds, yeah. It's a nice simple rule of bond trading, the first one. Okay, bonds that evidence greater interest rate sensitivity. Okay? Greater interest rate sensitivity. We can look at duration, or we can simply look at the mechanics of price. Longer bonds, we're locking in that shift. We're locking in that shift. All right, so under exam conditions, frequently you're asked to value some bonds, and then asked what you should do, for argument's sake, in the context of a portfolio of bonds, given a particular change in markets. Okay? So that's the style of question that you might encounter. Okay? This is the price of the bond, this is the price of another bond. If we anticipate a change, which is superior in the context of our portfolio, all other things being equal? Okay. Okay, in this course, you're informed about interest index bonds, but again, it's not something that we examine at this stage. So interest index bonds are simply bonds that adjust coupons or indeed capital value based on some model of indexation. So for example, the consumer price index. Okay, so in this example, you can see we have a bond with a particular face value and a guaranteed real interest rate of 5% paid quarterly. If inflation is 1.91, what will the bond pay? So, if it's a guaranteed 5% quarterly, it has to be 1.25% after inflationary adjustment. That means the bond will always pay CPI in addition to its fixed rate. Okay? So you'll get CPI as well. And then these instruments are a very popular instrument because they provide a degree of resilience to the holder. Okay, but obviously they cost more because you're essentially pricing out much of the risk. There's not too much complexity to them though, but obviously these securities evidence less volatility. Okay? Okay. With a capital index bond, what we're doing is adjusting on a quarterly or semi-annual basis the value of capital to reflect changes in inflation through time. So we make an adjustment to that capital value each quarter, okay, depending on the level of CPI. All right. That's just more for interest's sake, as I said. All right, we now come to our discussion of treasury bills. Okay, and as I said, if you pay attention now, when we do this in a corporate context, it'll be assumed knowledge. You won't even need to worry.
I'm just back on that formula. I'm just trying to get that 1.04 to the power of -7. Can you show us that later?
Yes, most certainly. As I said, I'm always in two minds about including examples that are on non-coupon days, but I hope you appreciate it's for knowledge's sake. We will be doing slightly more straightforward examples. We'll do a few today because this is important. So this is the other formula you need to be familiar with in this course in the context of pricing. So when it comes to pricing in this course, we price bonds, we price bills, we price shares. Okay? This is how we go about pricing bills. Okay, for those of you that want some extra material on this, there's a lot in the textbook, but much of it is beyond the scope of this course. Okay? When it comes to what you need to know, you need to understand this formula and the mechanics of pricing. So essentially being able to look at shifts in price and explain what's happening within the market. Okay? That intuition. So, what is a T-note? A T-note is a pure discount security that is issued at a discount against its face value. This is the best formula because it minimizes error. There are approximately 3 alternatives. In fact, there are more than that, but there are 3 standard alternatives to this. One that is used in one of the courses you might be doing concurrently, and another version of the next unit that you'll be taking in finance. You can use those as well. But what I will say is this minimizes the potential for error because you only have one numerator value and one denominator value to account for. Okay? And I like to encourage methods that minimize the potential for error. So a couple of things. A bank is to bid at tender for $100,000 of 182-day T-notes at a yield of 5.5% per annum. What price will the bank pay if the tender is successful? All right. It seems like an odd question, doesn't it? Why would the bank tender for T-notes? Well, it tenders for them because, as I said, there's great benefit in them. They're very, very low risk. They are, in the context of Basel II, very consistent with, I guess, the needs, wants, and requirements of Basel II. And beyond that, this isn't often discussed enough. More often than not, the government will sell these sorts of instruments with very, very loose terms attaching to them, with the ability for them to be reassigned quite readily. So they're a near cash equivalent. It's like getting yield on cash without having to hold cash. The other great benefit is if these securities are being purchased not from government directly, but from the Reserve Bank, or in this context, the partner agency, which is the Australian Office of Financial Management, they can be purchased with agreements in place that define when they're going to be sold back. All right? So when it comes to securities purchased directly from the Central Reserve, you can buy them with a repurchase agreement in place, which means that you can carry them and then assign them back and then carry them again. So you actually get the benefit of being able to get a return overnight on the security, but getting intraday liquidity. Why do you think the Reserve Bank does that? Why is the Reserve Bank so relaxed when it comes to this category of security? Why is the Reserve Bank happy to say, hey, we'll carry the security during the day, and you can carry the security overnight and generate some yield? Or you can carry the security for a week and then sell it to us, for argument's sake, whatever the terms are. Yeah, that's 100% correct. The Reserve Bank's goal is to ensure system liquidity, not to maximize its return. I mean, the reality is the Reserve Bank knows what it's going to do. You know, it could quite comfortably generate returns based on an understanding of its own actions, but its goal isn't to generate the highest conceivable return. Its goal is to ensure system liquidity. All right. So 100,000 is just multiplied by 365, divided by 365 plus yield on 100 multiplied by days to maturity. So, a couple of key things to remember. I think that it's very hard to make a mistake with this question, okay, and this style of question, if you know it reasonably well. But students do frequently make a mistake with this part. All right? They frequently make a mistake here and here. Okay? It is one of the most commonly made mistakes. Around 20% of candidates switch the multiplication and addition. Okay? Very, very common. I have no idea why. I think because maybe they've learnt other methods in the past. But please don't do that. They're wasted marks. These marks are the tennis equivalent of a lob. All right? You need to get the math right, because sometimes the theory can be challenging. All right, the other commonly made mistake relates to yield. So in this version, this is the US SEC version. In this version, it's yield divided by 100. I think what it really should say is yield as a decimal. Okay? It should probably say something like that, yield as a decimal. Okay? They don't want you to take an already decimal value and divide it by 100. Okay? But around 15% of students do that. They take an existing decimal value and they divide it by 100 again. And they end up with a value very, very close to the face value. That's how you know you've made a mistake. Okay? When you look at your answer and you're valuing a $100,000 instrument and it's 99,999, you know you've done it wrong. It's a $150,000 instrument and you're getting 149,999, you know you've done it wrong. So check your answer. Give it a sense check. Is it logical? Okay? So we just want yield as a decimal. All right. What about calculating yield when sale price and current price are known? Let's go about doing that now. We have a 182-day T-note with a face value of $100,000 selling currently at 97,540 with a full 182 days to run to maturity. So in this example, you can see we have our face value of 100k. We then deduct 97,540. That first step is calculating your discrete dollar yield. That's your discrete yield in dollar terms. Okay? You then divide it by the selling price, and that gives you your percentage yield. Okay? So we get our dollar yield, we then divide it by the selling price, we have our percentage yield. Okay? We then annualize it. All we're doing here is annualizing it and presenting it as a nice, neat value. All right, you might ask, well, why is it 360,500? It's just a convention. I do concede that it might make it seem a little bit confusing, but this is historically how it's always been done. All that's doing is just presenting the value in a neat way. All right, if you didn't have those zeros, it'd obviously be 0.0506. Okay? So what is that telling us? It's telling us that this security, if it's held to maturity, is going to offer a yield to maturity of 5.06%. This security is offering a yield to maturity of 5.06%. All right, as I said, we'll do lots of examples today. We have plenty of time. The next part of the session is rather short. So, all right, we're going to talk briefly about state government securities now. State governments issue securities as well. As I've mentioned in the past, Victoria has the best rating of every state in this country. We have the best credit metrics. We are the engine that drives the Australian economy. All right? It's true. It actually is. It really, really is. It doesn't seem that way. But we are the best performed state at present. In saying that, are we the most strategically important state? Well, that's probably Western Australia, without a doubt, by virtue of the mining operations that are in place in Western Australia and their strategic importance. But in terms of economic contribution, we're producing the greatest contribution at present. There are a number of reasons for that. We contribute substantially through financial services and general professional services, so we provided the largest state-level contribution in those terms. We also contribute substantially through education. We're probably the second most popular destination for students globally now. Australia is now a more popular destination for education than the United Kingdom. Okay? It is cheaper to study a master's degree at the London School of Economics than it is at an Australian university. All right, that's how far Australia has come. It's kind of confronting to think that, but that's the Victorian economy at present, a major contributor. New South Wales is going through some challenging times to an extent. A number of state-based utilities have been laggards for a time and underperforming for a time. Some of them have been privatised, and their performance hasn't improved markedly since. And that's the reason for the slight downgrade on the New South Wales rating. All securities issued in Victoria are issued through the Treasury Corporation of Victoria, sometimes referred to as VicFin. Why do we borrow at a state level rather than letting departments borrow directly and work with intermediaries directly? Well, it's because of that crowding out effect issue. Many have argued that if we allowed departments to moderate their own Treasury-related activities, that they would struggle to do so. And so we do it at a state level. When it comes to debt issuances, they can either be public, private, underwritten, or non-underwritten. A public offer is available to all. A private offer is available to a select few with an information memorandum provided. It is assumed that all participants are astute. The offer can also be underwritten or non-underwritten. If the offer is underwritten, it means that any securities not taken up by the market will be acquired by the underwriter. All right. Now we get to monetary policy. When it comes to the theory components of this course, monetary policy is important. And they do like me to examine this because it isn't covered enough within courses anymore. It's one of those things, everyone I think has a general understanding of monetary policy. It's one of those things that's discussed, around water coolers. We talk about water cooler discussion. This is the kind of thing people talk about frequently. But actually being able to forecast changes is challenging. Actually being able to forecast the implications of a change is also challenging. All right, and you get paid well to do so. If you work in a treasury team or a quant team, you will devote countless hours to this. Okay? So what is monetary policy? Well, we've talked about fiscal policy, we've talked about tax receipting, and the use of government monies in relation to public expenditure. The government spends money on roads, the government spends money on various infrastructure needs. That's fiscal policy. It does stimulate the economy as well. Fiscal policy puts money into the economy. That money is used for various purposes. All right? During the global financial crisis, we put the third most on a per capita basis into our economy through fiscal policy. We even provided once-off stimulus payments. Okay, I think we in Korea were the only countries to do that. We in South Korea, I should say, were the only countries to do that. But monetary policy is really the primary mechanism available to the central bank to elicit change within the economy. This is the main tool, all right? The challenge, however, is that monetary policy in many economies is used with dual outcomes and purposes in mind, all right? So in India, for example, monetary policy will be used to both stimulate the economy but also moderate the currency. The same is true of many other countries in Southeast Asia. But even India and China, to an extent, have seen the need to maintain a policy program such that they can use monetary policy effectively. The challenge is that in China, by virtue of their currency program, it's still somewhat challenging to separate two actions. Why is that? So India operates a float, but does still, a fairly open float, but does still intervene to influence the currency. How does the currency work in China? It's always good to have that other context, particularly if you come from that region, then you can generalize it. For all intents and purposes, it operates within a currency band linked to a market basket of currencies. So, in essence, in China, they track the performance of currencies relative to their own currency performance, and they will buy and sell securities, okay, and currency to ensure that the currency doesn't achieve a greater intraday volatility of what percent? Of 7% approximately. Okay? So that means it's challenging to utilize monetary policy in various ways in China and India, but they still maintain enough independence of action to have the ability to use monetary policy somewhat effectively. In Australia, because we operate, for all intents and purposes, an entirely clean float, we use the buying and selling of government securities just to influence the cash rate. All right? So, what is monetary policy? What is an open market operation? Well, monetary policy is essentially the use of open market operations to elicit an exchange in the cash rate or the overnight interbank rate, as some might describe it more technically. Okay? For all intents and purposes, the government will have a particular position in relation to what they would like to happen in the economy. However, they have vested with the Reserve Bank the powers to control all of this. The Reserve Bank does this independent of government. You will hear government talk about this from time to time. Right? So I can recall, post-GFC hearing, I'm trying to think of what Rudd's buddy from the Liberal Party was at the time. They used to be on that Today program together every morning. Oh gosh, his name is eluding me at the moment. Joe Hockey. Joe Hockey, for a time, would frequently talk about the need for the Reserve Bank to take a particular position. He said, I would encourage the Reserve Bank to do this, or I would hope that the Reserve Bank would do that. But you'll note that he never directed the Reserve Bank to do anything. It's not within the government's discretion and capacity to do that. So the Reserve Bank is essentially a board and a broader entity constituted by economists and financial services professionals that make decisions about where the economy is headed and where it should be heading. They choose to buy or sell government securities to influence the supply of money in the system. This model is based almost entirely on the US and UK Board of Exchange models. The key point of difference between our model and the US model is the US operate a state board framework. Okay? So they have a number of state reserves that come together to constitute the Federal Reserve that make decisions on behalf of the Federal Reserve. Sorry?
The board is called OPEC. The board OPEC. OP is
OPEC.
petroleum board.
Yeah, OPEC is a little bit different. OPEC is the representative board that represents, I guess, a state-sanctioned cartel. So this board is essentially a board of representatives appointed by government to act on behalf of the people of a given policy, in this case obviously Australia. As I said, our model is a little bit different to the US model because we have everyone appointed through direct appointments. There is no federated state model. Okay? So it means the governments do have a little bit more influence here over who is appointed and who gets to the board. In the US, it's a little bit more independent. So, if for argument's sake the Reserve Bank decide that they want to engage in a particular monetary policy action, let's say for argument's sake they want to reduce the supply of money in the system. Let's say for argument's sake they want to increase interest rates. How would they go about doing that? What is the open market operation action they would take? This was an exam question last year. Just putting it out there. Let's think about it in security terms, all right? So you're the Reserve Bank, all right? You have a portfolio of securities, and your goal is to increase interest rates. And all you can do to achieve that outcome, in the first instance, is to either buy or sell securities to influence the supply of money in the system. So let's say, for argument's sake, you want to increase interest rates. How might you go about increasing interest rates? What might you do?
Sell security into the market at a higher interest rate.
So if we sell securities into the market, what are we doing? So if we're selling securities into the market, we are effectively taking out of the system. And what happens to the supply of money? And what happens to the price of money? Goes up. Yeah, you were correct. We can't refer to them as deposits because they're not deposits in the traditional sense of them being deposits. They're effectively investments, security investments. So that's what the Reserve Bank does. If, for argument's sake, the Reserve Bank wants interest rates to fall, what's it going to do? Just think about it in pure supply and demand terms. That's what I want you guys to do. Think about it in pure supply and demand terms. If I want to reduce rates, what am I going to do? How do you reduce the price of something? That's exactly right. Just make more money available to the system. How do you make more money available to the system? Buying securities, returning money to the system. So it's pure supply and demand economics. Pure supply and demand economics. If you remember that, you'll never really encounter any issues in being able to frame a response. The key thing to remember is think about the interest rate as being the price of money. If you think about it that way, you can use pure supply and demand economics to explain what's going to happen each time. Okay, so you need to be able to explain, for argument's sake, how the Reserve Bank will go about increasing rates or go about reducing rates in a given context.
They also determine the cash reserve ratio for the bank.
That's exactly right. And so that's the next mechanism that is available to them. Because they moderate the payment system, they also determine the overnight interbank rate attaching to bank accounts held with the Reserve. And that is the secondary mechanism that they have available to them to elicit the change. Okay? So all of a sudden the banks are paying different rates.
Is it very effective in terms of increasing and reducing the supply of money in the economy because it's not the only supplier of...
No, you're 100% correct. The effectiveness of monetary policy through time to an extent has changed because the government's capacity to influence the position has changed. But it is still significant because I guess when you think about it, you need to sort of think about all of the concurrent transactions. This is an action, for all intents and purposes, that is substantial in both magnitude size and also in intertemporal impact, it's done all at once, or largely over a relatively short period of time. And so even though we don't have the same monetary clout, the same cash reserves perhaps as we once did relative to the economy, we can still elicit a change. But you're right, the effectiveness of this policy has changed a lot. One of the other key challenges is that when rates get really, really low, what happens then? What happens when rates get really, really low? I'm not going to give you this question this year because it's in my extended readings, but you start to do something else. What do you consider doing? Whoever answers the next question, I've already told you actually I can't give out high distinctions, but I would like to. What do economies do when they really start to struggle at that point at which it's not pragmatic to reduce your rate anymore using traditional monetary policy? So I'll use the words traditional monetary policy.
They basically tank the currency to try to fuel it.
That's an interesting way to put it, tank their currency. Yeah, well, I mean, you're 100% correct. I won't describe it as tanking currency for those playing at home, but we call it quantitative easing or credit easing. Has anyone heard that expression before? It comes from a Japanese economic movement called Abe economics. Anyone from Japan that can help us out? That economic movement? It's a really intriguing economic movement. What is the logic behind Abe economics in the context of quantitative easing? The US described their program as being a little bit different, but for all intents and purposes, they're very, very similar. So,
They're issuing money at the real.
yeah, so in essence, in Japan, the situation got, I'm not going to say dire because the economy in some respects has been quite resilient, but the rate scenario was such that they couldn't drive rates down any further. They were already entering, negative territory in real terms. And so they needed to do something different. And so rather than acquiring public sector assets, they said, well, we're going to start considering acquiring private sector assets with public money. Okay? That's a remarkably different approach to be taking to your economy. Because using public sector securities has a really obvious impact and an obvious interchange with the economy, and it doesn't skew the private sector performance in any way. When you're acquiring private sector assets, all of a sudden, what are you doing? Yeah, you're picking and choosing who you're going to invest in the context of the private sector. So the US took it one step further. And post-GFC, what did they do? George W. Bush and his economic team. And can I just say, just quietly, and people are very critical of him, but one thing I will say is that, based on the advice that he had and the situation that they were in, could they have done much else?
So they bought distressed assets and non-poor-performing companies.
That's perfect. For all intents and purposes, they made the determination they weren't just going to buy private sector assets, they were going to consider acquiring distressed private sector assets as well. Okay? But their belief was that we have a particular portfolio goal in mind. We want a particular portfolio model for our economy, and this is what we're going to target. So they acquired a huge number of private sector assets, and assets not just in well-performed companies, but in substantially underperforming companies, and also distressed companies to prop up their economy. They refer to that as credit easing, okay? As credit easing. Okay? Very, very similar to quantitative easing.
So do they keep track of where they are in relation to what assets they still have?
They do. The US contention is that they have very strong portfolio goals in mind, and so Ben Bernanke he would often try to contrast his view and his position from the Japanese view and Japanese position, and he was the one that would frequently use that terminology of Abe economics to describe that being what they do and this being what we do. The Japanese approach was much more conservative. The US approach, in some respects, it was sort of enacted with multiple motives. One to stimulate the economy and another to sort of stave off the decline of certain key banking sector entities. And so a number of major banking sector entities have been major beneficiaries of this US stimulus program. And so that stimulus program was supposed to end close to the end of the Bush administration's term. And then it was continued. There were some decisions made by Congress and made by, obviously, the President to continue the program. And so the program was put into place again and then subsequently supported by the Obama administration as well. So the Obama administration decided to continue the program. Okay? And that was supposed to have been discontinued during Obama's first term. Okay? And it continues even to this day. So the reality is a short-term program has now become, I guess, one of the reasons that the US economy has been somewhat resilient. Okay, so that's quantitative easing and credit easing. Not within the scope of this year's paper, though. All right, finally, we're going to talk briefly about our payment system. We'll then have a quick break today, and we're going to do some questions. So the payment system is critical, as I've discussed. It's the mechanism that facilitates the transfer of value from one financial institution to another. We've had a payment system in place for a number of years. In recent years, we made the decision that we wanted to develop a concurrent payment system. So at present, we have two payment systems. Okay? We have our standard payment system, the majority of transactions happen through, and we have our new payment system. What is our new payment system called? Very creative name. It's called the New Payments Platform. All right? And the New Payments Platform was established by a consortium of banks and a number of non-banks, and the goal was to facilitate more expedient exchanges. Some emerging nations have systems in place that have been developed by telecommunications partners that already do these things. So in Kenya, there is already a system that effectively does much of what our system intends to do. But what makes this system remarkable is that it will become the most significant system within our framework within a few years. So the UK system has been in place for around 2 years. Okay? It still isn't the largest payments platform in the country. Okay, the standard existing payments platform is, but by the year 2022 it will be. Okay? Probably going to see a similar trajectory here. For the next few years, this initial payments platform will be slow in terms of being able to accrue new members and new transactions. But by the year 2026, it'll probably be the largest payment platform in the country. And so those that haven't migrated will be in trouble. All the major banks are part of the new system, but several major bank subsidiaries are not. So St George, Bank of Melbourne, SA Bank are not part of the new payments platform just yet. The traditional system does not facilitate real-time gross settlement. It supports intraday netting. And what that means is that over the course of a given day, the various banks report their net positions to the Central Reserve and they're netted against one another. It doesn't happen in real time, however. With the new system, even low-value transactions will net generally in under a minute. Okay? Most are contended to net potentially in under 30 seconds. That is going to present some real value. Think about the implications for this new system. How do people facilitate expedient transacting at present? If, for example, you want to pay for something really, really quickly, you're down at the shops, you, for argument's sake, want to purchase a good, how do you do so really quickly right now? What system do you use? You might use PayPass or PayWave or something. So this system is actually going to have real implications for those EDI providers, for MasterCard and for Visa, for American Express. Because for all intents and purposes, you'll be able to have a very similar experience using the new payments platform. Okay? Have you noticed that they've been advertising a lot more recently? Yeah, there's been a real substantial increase in the amount of advertising from Visa and MasterCard. I saw 7 Visa ads yesterday over the course of 2 hours. Okay? So the reality is everyone does know what's coming. All right? And they're trying to entrench their positions. All right. So exchange settlement accounts are the critical account in the context of the payment system. They're the main settlement account. It's a special account with the RBA to facilitate the settlement of value transactions in the payment system. The only major transactions that settle in real time in the current payment systems are high-value transactions, more often than not property transactions. All right? If you're facilitating the exchange of property, probably have 2 banking sector representatives communicating with one another and facilitating a real-time exchange, okay, using the RTGS system. But everything else takes some time. All right, so a couple of things to be mindful of. These systems will continue to be in place, at the very least for another decade, maybe even 2. All right? It will take some time for the existing RTGS and the existing non-RTGS systems to no longer be viable, such that we discontinue them. All right, just so you know, you have to opt into the new payment system. You have to opt in with your bank. So for those of you that want to try this out, you need to opt in. Okay? All right, so in terms of key takeaways from today, we have covered off on a lot, but can I just emphasize a couple of key things? In terms of takeaways from today, you guys need to be familiar with our discussion of bonds, and in particular bond pricing and bond mechanics. We're going to be doing some bond pricing now. We'll go through some of those earlier examples and some new ones. And you also need to be familiar with the bill instruments as well. Please bear in mind, we are going to do bonds and bills again in the context of corporate debt. So we'll do more examples over the course of the next few weeks. You also need to be familiar with monetary policy. I can't emphasize that enough, all right? It's important that you can articulate to a third party how monetary policy operates in the real world. So essentially how an open market operation is utilized to facilitate an exchange within the system, facilitate a shift or a change within the system. All right, so if it's all good with you guys, we might have just a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll spend the final half an hour just going through some examples. Hi.
First of all, I want to know how this 61/1 will actually happen.
Okay.
When I tried to calculate it, I was getting 62/180. So.
Okay, so if you have, yeah, I'll show you. So if you count the number of days between, okay, so if you count the number of days between 15th November 2009 and 6 months prior to that date, it's 184. 6 months prior to 15th November 2009.
15th of May to 15th of November.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's your first interval. And then your next interval is the distance between May and July.
I'm sorry, you said it's going to be 194?
184.
84.
And then the next interval is the May to July interval. And so that's 31 days. And the reason that, 61 days. And the reason that it's 61 days is that one of the months has 30 days and the other has 31.
How is that? Because from 15th of May to 31st of May is actually...
No, it's not 31st of May. It's the 15th of July.
No, I'm talking about the May and July interval.
Yeah, so the May interval is 6 months prior to the 15th of November.
Yeah, I got that. That's how I got this one.
Yes.
I'm just saying this one.
Yeah, so if you count from that interval, so what do you consider to be the first interval in your mind?
You mean the 184?
No. The first interval. So we
That's
have...
15th of May to
Correct.
15th of July.
Yes.
So is it 21? Is it 61 days?
Yes.
I'll recalculate.
Yeah.
I'll recalculate because I was getting 62.
Yeah, are you adding both days?
Okay.
Because you have to...
I'm actually including the 15th.
Yeah, so you're inclusive of 1 date. That's why I said people make many mistakes with this count. So that's the difference in days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then another question is, for this formula, why are we not using this formula? Why are we using this formula? Is it because of this day thing? Because
No, that's an entirely different thing. So that's an entirely different thing. Well, first of all, this one isn't correct. You can't actually do a day count with this one. So, yeah, you have to make an adjustment. This is probably the one that people have taught you in the past. Yeah, the reason that I don't use this one is because you'll note there are 3 factors, and you have to use one common factor 3 times, and so you can make more mistakes. So, by simplifying the equation, mathematically this is the same. So you can see you have your term there. What they've done is they've brought the interest term out for some unknown reason, and they brought it here. So they've created a non-standard equation. This equation doesn't exist anywhere else, but this is an annuity. So what they've done is they've taken the standard annuity equation and they've made it a non-annuity, just for the sake of trying to be different. So if you have a look, that's just an annuity formula. It's a standard formula in financial mathematics. Like that's, like Financial Maths 101. This one, someone has just taken out the I and brought it into the front, and now there's multiple adjustments that need to be made to the front. So you have to have your dollar value here, and you have to have your rate term here, and you have no standardization here. So you can't, this is a standard entry in your financial calculator. This is not a standard entry in your financial calculator. So if you're using a financial calculator, you kind of have to use the annuity method because it's an annuity. If you're doing it this way, you can't replicate the first half of the equation. I mean, you can. It's mathematically the same. This mathematically is exactly the same as this. The only thing that they've done here, they've gotten rid of the I, and see how it's taken the power of -1? That's the equivalent to 1 on. Does that make sense? So, for example, if you have 1 plus I to the n, right? What they've done is that they've taken this out, brought it here, and then they've taken this term, and you still see how it's -1 here? They've taken that term and they've made this, so I'll show you, like 1 plus I to the -n equals 1 on 1 plus I, like that, to the n. So what they've done is they've taken that, and for some reason they've made it that. And then they've taken that, and for some reason they brought it to the front.
Anyway, this is more appropriate.
Well, no, it's mathematically exactly the same. Yeah, so this here is the same as that.
Okay.
And this here is the same as this. Mathematically, this is identical. So the only difference is, yeah, well, they've forgotten to put that on there. Yeah, so that's missing though. See, this one needs to have this, and this, and then an adjustment term. Because with this equation, you can't actually calculate a bond price.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can only calculate an approximation of a bond price.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Because that's
what?
what we use in finance.
It's okay. That was why, because see, other people are not aware of what other lecturers use, but I'm aware of what everyone teaches. Yeah. So in the other finance course, they would, because it's taught by people that come from an economics background.
Okay.
Yeah. So I teach econometrics, so I know how they think, but most of them have never taught finance. So in the finance world, we don't do this, because what you're doing is you're making it harder for yourself to get the correct answer. Because look at how many potential points of error you've got. You've got one there, you've got one here, and you've got one here. But here, you're only accounting for the coupon once, okay, and you're not adjusting the coupon. So with this one, you have to retain 1, 2, 3 things,
Yeah.
and with this one, you only have to retain 2.
Okay, so another question I want to ask, are these formulas going to be provided
Yes.
for an exam?
Yeah.
Not a crime.
No, you get a full formula sheet, and it has a label too. It'll say bond
So
value.
we don't have to cram anything.
No.
Okay. And
Yeah.
This is an extension of that. Any way we can get just the sheet pre-extension?
Yeah, oh, most certainly. Yeah.
So we can sort of work off that.
The only thing I would say is, with the version of the formula sheet that you get, it has 23 formulas on it. You'll never use all 23 in your exam. You'll probably only use 7, if you know what I mean. But you can't just.
There's 2 ways of doing it.
Yeah, look.
Carrying questions at home, it's all like if I stick to
One method. Look, I know that people do this, and so they even teach exchange rate calculations reversed. Like it's mathematically, there's actually an international standard called ISO 1072. It governs how you have to convey financial information. It's like a law, right, of international financial standards, but it's like academics want to forget about it.
Yeah.
Like they just pretend that it doesn't exist. No, because it makes the math maybe make a bit more sense to them. It's a bit easier. But if, for example, you do any exchange calculations in any finance course, you'll find that anyone that's never worked in finance will not use this 1072 standard, even though it's an international ISO. Like if you were to go to a bank and do that, you'd lose your job. You know what I mean? But in the kind of contrived world we live in, you could do anything. You just like all of the calculations we do are based on RBA SEC equations. The bill formula I use, I'll concede, is the US version, not the Australian version, because the Australian bill formula is a bit confusing. But with the bond formula, that's the standard one. You probably, that's the one?
Yep.
You probably see it in the other finance class?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So
I've actually got a finance.
yeah. So the challenge is this formula. It creates three non-standard formulas
Yep.
that are not really financial formulas, if that makes sense. So like this is an annuity,
Yep.
but if you use this, that's not an annuity. That's literally calculating a non-standard variable that can't be interpreted. Yeah, so this is called, if you were to look this up online or in any advanced maths course, it'd be called PVIFA.
Yep.
This is literally not a thing. It's like just a made-up thing.
Abbreviation, you kind of
Well, it's not even an. Well, if you use it correctly with the intervening step, then it gives you the correct answer. But this one,
Yep.
the reason that we teach this one is because this same formula can be used 4 different places the identical way. This version can't be used anywhere else, and so it creates a lot of confusion in students' minds because you'll end up having to learn this one anyway. So when you do mortgages
Yep.
in that class, because I've taught that one too. When you do mortgages in that class, we'll make you learn this anyway.
Well, conceptually, it could almost trip you up because you think, okay,
That's an
basis of
annuity.
This is an annuity, and then whatever affects.
And so this is the standard kind of 100-year-old math behind an annuity.
Yep.
For whatever reason, I don't know why, some people just certain textbooks.
It can get derived
It's-
mathematically different ways. Suppose
Well, yeah, I mean mathematically it's the same. Like in terms of the underlying math, you're essentially getting a very, very similar answer. The only problem with this one is it can only calculate the answer on a coupon day, so it can't calculate it on a non-coupon day. Yeah, but that's fine too. I mean that's what you start with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
For finance. And so lastly,
Yep.
I want
That's all right.
I don't remember how you did these questions. This was on week 5. I'm sorry.
okay, so do you want me to do them quickly now?
Yes. Or the formula.
Is it okay if I do it afterward? Because I'm already a few minutes over.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll give you the formula. That's no problem. I'm sure I would love to do it. Yeah,
This is R, right?
yeah, or you can call it R.
Okay.
And then that one will be the same. Yeah, it's still the same,
Same formula.
except that the difference is that this one you can't calculate because this and this don't work.
But how did you do it?
You can't. That's the point.
I can't calculate it.
No.
So how did you solve it in the class?
We didn't.
It's a question.
Yeah, no, it is a question. What I'm saying is, this is to show you that you've learnt the logic correctly. If you think that you can calculate this, it means that you don't understand the question logic.
Oh.
Yeah, because the discount rate is greater than the rate of change. So mathematically, it's not possible. It means that you've not done the assumption. Yeah, so the answer to this one is you can't have a negative value because it's a limited liability share. So if it was a full liability share, then you can have a negative value. But do you see what I'm saying? You can't have a discount rate and a rate of change that vary like that. The rate of change has to be lower than...
This has to be lower than this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But otherwise the math won't work.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hey. Yeah. Yeah, I know everyone will have lots of questions about that. So did you count it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
calculators are-
Yeah, so you include the first 15, but you don't include the final day. That's why it's 61. Yeah. Because you can't... you can't include the first day and have the seller also including the last day. You understand? If you sell to her and you include the last day, should she also include that day for her calculation? Only one of you can include either the first or last day. So you could always include the first day, and then she includes the next first day. So you don't include your last day.
For last day is my first day.
Correct. Yeah.
And I have some question about the
Yeah.
assignment.
Is it okay if I'll literally, this is going to be very quick, 25 minutes, and then we'll all have a chat.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. All right. I can't right now. I'm really sorry. Is that okay? Is that okay? All right.
It's just that name.
Sorry?
You were about to say your name.
Yes, I know. Is it okay if I, do you mind? You have to get past it. Sorry. Okay. All right. So, couple of things. As I mentioned, and a couple of students, came over and confirmed this as well. You've probably been taught a few ways to do certain things. All right, and you'll find that in finance that happens a lot, unfortunately. So what I do, just so you know, is I base everything on the international ISO 1072, which is essentially the international framework for the provision of all financial information. And there's a very exacting set of standards in relation to how financial information should be shared. But unfortunately, not all textbooks are aware of that, because textbooks are not necessarily written by people that have operated in those contexts per se. All right? So sometimes some of the things that you'll be taught, for example, when you do any course in international markets or international finance, there are two reasonably popular international texts. They actually teach you financial mathematics in a completely wrong and not lawful way, but they're not aware of it because they've never actually worked in international markets. So what I would say is that as long as you get to the right answer, that's all that matters. But there is a correct way to get to the right answer too. All right? You're not going to be marked on that in this course, though, so you don't need to worry about it. But I do want to draw your attention to it. Okay. Okay. So we're going to do some questions. These questions are broadly indicative of the style of question that you will see in this topic in particular. This is an important topic. Okay. A lot of questions come out of this topic because we cover off on a lot of pricing concepts in this topic. But again, bear in mind, first level, we keep our training wheels on. We're not going to be doing complex day count adjustments. We're not going to be doing any adjustment to account for any intertemporal change in volatility or any change in inflationary pressure. Not at this level. All right, what we're going to be valuing in this course, vanilla bonds. We value vanilla bonds on coupon days, if you want to talk about it technically. Vanilla bonds on coupon days. So we'll start with some theory questions, then we'll do our calculations. All right. Actually, I don't know if this will help or not, but I've built a lot of calculators in software and also in Excel that allow you to check your answers. The only reason I haven't been too forthcoming with them with this cohort is because I know many people, don't come from a finance background, and so it does kind of give you a bit of an easy way out when it comes to doing the questions. And I would much prefer you take a first principles approach, but would you guys use those? Would that be helpful? Because that way you can just check everything yourself. All right, and you can be guaranteed that the math is correct. So I'll upload Excel versions, all of the Excel versions. If you want PHP-based versions, I can send you links, but it's probably just easier in Excel. Okay? So I'll do that this evening. If I haven't done it by, well, actually, I'll endeavour to do it by around 7 this evening. I don't know if I have any on my desktop here. When I get home, I'll do it around then. All right. That way you'll have calculators to calculate the answer to every question you get in this course, and also your other subjects. Okay. All right. What is the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy? Nice simple one. Yep. So fiscal policy relates to all our spending and stimulus programs that involve the payment of money or the provision of money into the system. So the payments for goods and services, the supply of supports to the community. Fiscal policy relates to tax receipting and government spending. Okay? Monetary policy relates to the decisions of the Central Reserve in relation to the overnight interbank rate and the cash rate. All right? So that's the key distinction that you need to be able to draw. Okay, so one relates to receipting and spending. All right, nice straightforward one. We'll move on. What is the cash rate? It's one of those great things. You should actually ask people this question. Got to ask people foundational things about the way things work. What is the cash rate? What is the rate that attaches to the payment system? I guarantee you, most academics won't even be able to explain what the payment system is. It's really important. It's the second thrust in the system. All right, so what is the cash rate? How does it differ from the settlement rate? Yes. Well, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so it's the short-term rate that attaches to the supply of money in the system. Now, I like that. Yeah, that works. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very, very good point of comparison. So it's a short-term rate. All right. How does it differ from the settlement account rate? You were talking about that before. It's a good point. Do you want to raise it again? Yeah, so exactly right. So that's the rate that the Reserve Bank controls in relation to exchange settlement accounts held with the Reserve Bank. All right? But you'll find that these rates should be one and the same, but they're technically not the same thing. Okay? It isn't entirely incorrect to use the terms interchangeably, and you'll find many textbooks and academics do, but there is a subtle distinction. Okay? There is a subtle distinction. All right. Next one. Open market operations. What are open market operations and how are they employed to influence the cash rate? I hope you're seeing a trend here in terms of this being a little bit important. What is the term, or I should say, what are the terms open market operation used to describe? You were correct, and then you went somewhere weird with it. Sorry? Yeah, so essentially an open market operation is the decision by the Reserve Bank to intervene in the market and engage in a buying or selling behaviour in relation to a key government security or securities. That's an excellent point. Is that an open market operation? It's not an open market operation in the traditional sense, but it is monetary policy. It's called non-conventional monetary policy. So yeah, that's a slight quirk, and something that didn't really happen much up until the last 20 years. It's been very popular in the last 20 years. But technically they're not open market operations, but those actions are considered non-traditional monetary policy. But we're not going to be examined on any of that this year. Okay? Yes. Yes, no, that caused a lot of debate. I got a lot of emails about that after that class. So I was amazed at how passionate people are about that issue. Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, demonetization has a number of different impacts. One of the key goals of demonetization was to return liquidity to the system. The goal was to bring all of that money back into the system. And I've met with countless students, talked with dozens and dozens of them that explained to me what happened in their familial context in relation to demonetisation. So I know it was quite a substantial thing, you know. And I have no formal opinion on this. Just let it be known. So I don't want to debate the subject with anyone tonight. But for those of you that do have an interest, there's a lot of literature on it. So if you do email me about the subject, I'll more than happily sort of send you some of the research published in some of the top tier journals around the topic.
So open market operations are very bonds and
For all intents and purposes, the purchase of any government securities, in our context, that's how we refer to it. Because technically we can still use bill securities to influence outcomes, and we can use bond securities to influence outcomes. We just don't really have a very deep and liquid bill market, so we don't really have the same capacity to utilise bills in the same way. That's an excellent point. Look, a lot of people do in finance use the 90-day bank bill rate as a proxy or surrogate when we don't have a lot of liquidity within a given market or availability of securities within the government security category. So we use it as an alternative for the bill security. But technically speaking, the cash rate is the rate at which securities are exchanged in an open market operation, and it's the rate that they seek to maintain. The overnight interbank rate is the rate at which banks can facilitate exchanges with the reserve. Technically, they should be one and the same, but there is a distinction. Yeah. All right, so next question. When many nations employ the same currency, as is the case with the euro, how can they moderate their cash rate domestically? This is a challenging theory question. Okay. It really shows if people are, grasping these things well. Obviously, at this level, though, this is not necessarily indicative of what you would always see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the EU project, I'd say, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. There are some economies that don't want to have carriage of the risk and issues of other economies. But what about this ability to influence the cash rate? If you have a common currency or a common currency zone, what happens to your ability to influence your cash rate? Can you? Is what I'm asking. Can you have differential rates attaching to a common currency? Yeah, well, beyond difficult, for all intents and purposes, it becomes impossible. This is one of the key challenges associated with or comes about when you attach yourself to a currency zone. You can't have differential rates attaching to a common currency. Okay? It just doesn't work effectively unless, for argument's sake, there is some sort of domestic risk issue attaching to the debt tranche. You effectively have common currency. All right, so when it comes to buying and selling securities to influence the cash rate, can you actually effectively moderate your currency? No, for all intents and purposes, you become part of a currency zone. You lose the ability to moderate the cash rate. And it's a real challenge because if you're, for argument's sake, in an economy where there is substantial inflationary pressure, let's say for argument's sake you're in one of the more emerging economies and there's a substantial outflow of goods, and a substantial appreciation in the price of local goods and services, well, you can't increase interest rates in your territory. You can't offer a higher rate of interest in your territory because, well, people are simply just going to be switching assets. It's just simply not going to work. The funds will be flowing into your system at this higher rate, but people will be borrowing at a lower rate. It's essentially a pure arbitrage opportunity, or as close to a pure arbitrage opportunity in this market as you can get.
Remember back to the days when East Germany amalgamated with West Germany, 1989. East Germany was the poor cousin, West Germany was the wealthier nation, and yet they worked out their
I have real belief in the euro as a project. I think it's going to be an enduring project, and I do wish that Brexit wasn't going to happen. But I think there are going to be some frictions for a little while, particularly because of Greece and Spain. It makes things problematic, and a number of the other economies as well. The more recent joinees, yeah, I guess it comes to this sort of notion of, are people prepared to accept, some sort of decline in their economy relative to another for the betterment of all? It's a complex question. All right. No, we'll set aside that next question, and we'll just do our two pricing questions now, question 4 and question 5. All right, so please pay particular attention as we do these. All right, and ask lots of questions. This is very indicative of the style of question that you'll get in this bond section. You'll be pricing some instruments. You'll then be required to explain what a change in rates is going to do. You might, for example, be required to explain what a change in monetary policy might do. Okay? If, for example, the cash rate changes, that's going to affect bank interest rates. It's going to affect rates across the market. That's going to have implications for bonds. All right? So you need to start thinking in those terms. So what is the price of a treasury bond issued with a face value of $100,000 with a coupon rate of 10% paid semi-annually if market yields are presently 9% per annum? Well, let's do this in Equation Builder. Or is Excel preferred or Equation Builder preferred? I find that it's hard for people to view things in Excel, that's all. What's your preference? People don't like Excel? See, I love everything in Excel, so that's me. Yeah, I know what I mean is Equation Builder in Word. Not writing the equation, but we'll do it in Word. I'll show you what I mean. All right. So, first of all, we'll generate the equation. So we'll insert. Good to do everything from first principles. You see every step. All right. Insert an equation. So we have PV bond equals. We have to put in our fractional term. We need that. And so we have coupon. I'm going to write it long form so people can remember. Just for now, okay? Coupon multiplied by bracket 1 minus 1 plus I to the power of minus n. My apologies. I think I did that last time too. Hopefully I... Power of minus n. No, not the power. There we go. All on I. Plus FV 1 plus I per... Isn't that fun? I love Equation Builder. Gosh. Makes things look neat. All right, so that's our starting point. I'll make that a little bit larger. You'll note that I have no 1 plus I to the k adjustment on this occasion because it has a very defined set of intervals. Okay, we'll go through both sets of examples, but what I'm not going to do is freak everyone out by going through just the complex ones. All right? We will do both, though, and I might do some with some people a little bit more directly if that's okay. So let's go through our question. Control Z. What am I doing? Get out of there. All right. So that's our equation. How do we value this security? Let's go back and look at the numbers. All right. So this has a face value of 100k, coupon rate of 10% per annum, semi-annually, paid semi-annually. Market yields are 9%. Market yields are 9%. All right. So let's first of all account for our coupon. We're then going to set that coupon rate aside. So our coupon rate is 10%. 10% of 100,000 is $10,000 divided by 2 for each semi-interval is 5,000. Well done. All right, so if you guys don't mind, I might just save myself a little bit of trouble and just copy that above. Okay. 5,000. Okay. What's our rate? Not our coupon rate. We're setting that aside. We want our market rate. Our market rate is 9% annually, so what is it? 0.0. Exactly right. It's 0.045. Sorry? We are about to do our N. We'll finish off on I, and then we'll do our N. All right, so N is another very important parameter. N is the number of intervals. I repeat, intervals, not years. Please note, N can also be, this relates to the earlier question, N can also be a partial interval. Doesn't have to be a full interval. Okay? Why is that important? Because the number of intervals determines the number of coupons. The day adjustment accounts for how much of the coupon you've accrued. Okay? So when you go into the more complex subjects, when we do the day count adjustments, please remember that. Sometimes people drop off a coupon payment. Okay? You count the number of intervals, the easiest way to think about this, how many coupons are remaining? How many coupons are remaining? That's my total number of intervals. All right, so let's return to the question so we can figure that part out. So I've got okay. Why have I not given you guys a number of years in there? That's rather stupid of me. Yeah, all right. No, that's my own fault. All right, so we're going to assume this is a 10-year instrument. All right, if it's a 10-year instrument, how many intervals are there? 20. To be honest with you, in this question, it won't actually matter too much, but all right. Okay, so 10 years, 20 intervals. What is our face value? Yep, very good. And then we just... and then we have it. Okay, so assuming 20 intervals or 10 years, semi-annual compounding, this is how we go about doing our calculation. We should know vaguely what the answer will be even without doing the numbers. All right? What should the answer be approximately? This is the intuition you need to develop. You'll never make a mistake if you have good mathematical intuition. All right? So, my discount factor is lower than my coupon rate. My coupon rate is 5% per interval. My discount factor is 4.5% per interval. So what must the price of this instrument be approximately? Well, you're on the right track. Is it going to be above or below 100,000? It's going to be above 100,000. Okay? It should be under 10,000 above 100,000. All right? So you start to develop a sensibility around these things. You can start to look at the numbers and develop a bit of a capacity or propensity to figuring out what the answer should be. So every time you see an equation, the first thing you need to do is provide a broad sense check to the question and then gauge the answer. So on this occasion, I know that my answer must be more than my face value. So if I get an answer that's less, I've done it incorrectly. Okay, do you know what at least 10% of students will get? They will get the same number. Why? Because they put in the same numbers, the discount factor and the coupon rate. Okay, so if you get the same number, ask yourself if you've done it correctly. If you've got an answer that's below, you've clearly done it incorrectly. Okay? Let's do the next one really quickly. I realized I've not actually put the year count in here for this one. So we'll assume the same parameters other than the rate change. Okay, so I'll copy this for those of you that want this. And we'll do the next one. Okay, so in our next example, we'll assume 10 years and 20 intervals again. Okay, but on this occasion, we're going to assume a different rate. The rate of discount is not going to be 9%, it's going to be 8%. So what is going to happen to the price of our bond? What is going to happen to the price of our bond if interest rates are now not 9%, they're 8%. The coupon rate is staying the same. So what's going to happen? The price will increase. The price will increase. Okay? So we'll make our adjustment, and you should be able to just see that visually. For those of you in your exam that do have a financial calculator or a TI series or Caspedia calculator, obviously you can just use the repeat step feature and just change the one parameter. Okay? You can do it that way. I'm fine with that. Just put down all of your entry values. Just so, if for argument's sake another assessor looks at it, they can figure out what you're doing. I can tell based on the differences in numbers where you've made a mistake, but I can tell you if you just put down your answer, with most examiners, you make their life very hard. All right? So if you're going to use your calculator, please make sure you put down value of n equals, value of I equals, value of coupon equals. Okay? And then present your answer. All right. So, let's say for argument's sake, we wanted to price a 10-year bond with a 5% coupon where the market discount rate is also 10%. Should we bother to do the calculation? Okay, why? Because when you increase something by the same value as your discount factor, they offset, all right? So that instrument will be trading at par. So when a bond's coupon rate and discount rate are one and the same, the bond will be trading at par. All right, let's consider an example that goes the other way. Let's say for argument's sake, market yields are now 14% annually and 7% per semi-annual interval. So market yields are 14% annually and 7% per semi-annual interval. How do we go about changing our calculation? In fact, let's change two parameters. Let's also say the instrument is now a quarterly instrument. It's a quarterly instrument, okay? The market discount rate is 14%. The coupon rate remains 10%. But it's now a quarterly instrument. So what is my value of C? My coupon rate is 10%, but it's quarterly. What is my value of C now? I'll move that one down so you can see some separation. Stays the same. 10%. 2,500. All we're doing is dividing by 4. All right? So if the rate stays the same but it's quarterly, it's going to be 2,500. Gosh, there we go. All right, still a 10-year instrument, but now it's making quarterly payments. What is my value of N for a 10-year instrument that is making quarterly payments? 40, exactly. Everyone got that really quickly. That's fantastic. So I'll put it, just to make it look a little pretty, I'll put a bracket there. All right. All right. I said that the market rate is now 14%, but it's quarterly. So it's going to be 3.5 per interval. Okay? Okay. And can I now ask, without even doing the calculation, I would like you to tell me what has happened to the price of this instrument. What has happened to the price of this instrument? Will this instrument be worth more or less in present dollar terms than the earlier two? Yes, it's going to be substantially less than 100,000. All right? Because there is a 1% differential between the quarterly discount rate and the installment payment. Okay? So you can see that these calculations are fairly straightforward to do. The key thing, as I said, is just being somewhat familiar with those initial equations. And as I said, you're entitled to use whichever one you're comfortable with. If you want to use the one that I'm using, that's fine. If you want to use the one that you've learnt in another course, that is fine as well. Just make sure that you put down those entry values. Please be very clear and explicit about doing that, okay? Because I will not be marking all of the papers, okay? And if other candidates here, other academics here are looking at your answer, you make it very hard for them if you only put down the answer, And a lot of students do that because they use financial calculators for this. I'd still encourage you, wherever possible, to try to use first principles if you can. All right, so in terms of today, this is what I want you to take away. If you're good at doing this, if you can understand how to price a bond and how a bond's price changes when the compounding interval changes and when rates change, that's your primary takeaway from today. Your ancillary takeaway, understanding monetary policy. That's the key theoretical concept from this week. So if you understand those two things, you'll be tracking very well for your final paper. Okay? So I'm going to be around for those of you that would like to have a chat about this, about assignments, about exams, or anything else related for the next 4 hours. But today I'm going to be down at building LB. Okay? So I'm going to be down at building LB. I will not be in my office. I'll be in the lower atrium. So if you want to come find me, you can literally just walk into the building, and I will be there with some groups of students. All right? So do feel free to pop over and say hello. All right, thank you for your patience as always. You guys have done very, very well. Please remember what I said at the start of class about choices with topics. I'll also be giving you a little bit of help with your assignment, okay? Look out for those templates, if they help. If you've already done it, great. I'll see you guys next week. So,
But why we use the May to
Oh, 6 months prior to final maturity date, because it's semi-annual. But this is the question you'd normally get in a later subject. This is not, yeah. So this one says half yearly, so that's end of year, and then 6 months earlier is here. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
See you. Yeah, that's what I was explaining. Mathematically, so with a power, right? When you have like a power, okay, it's the same as this. Remember, I think I wrote it on your other sheet for you.
And then,
Yeah, there, see? There. So it doesn't matter what you put in front of it. The FB is just like an extra thing.
then this is the same with this, right?
Yes, it is, but it's not completely, because what they've done is they've changed two things. They brought that out to the front. Remember I showed you in the earlier equation?
I'm asking, I'm wondering if I can use this formula for this question.
Yeah, you can.
I can, right?
Yeah. You can use, the only time you can't use this is if there's any adjustment.
Yeah, okay.
Then it becomes wrong.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. No. You need to know how to use it, but you were given this in the exam. So it'll say, has two parts. It'll say PV of face value. Correct. Yeah, so you get given this. Yeah, I'll be putting the formula sheet up soon so you can see it. Okay? No problem. Yeah, I'll just put this away and I'll put this off and I'll come talk to you. Sorry. Just because I always keep the next person waiting. Yeah.
No, there's lots of things. So there's lots of things. If you go to world development indicators, you go to world development indicators, huge things. And you'll for every country. But honestly, don't stress about it. It's entirely up to you. No one expects. Some people are, I would say, like the majority of people that are doing that topic, that do music data, trends, because it's not as hard as it seems. It seems hard. So if you go to world development indicators and you try to find these numbers, you'll find that insurance data is very important. So do you know how to use world development indicators? So there's a data source from the World Bank called World Development Indicators. So you go to UBI, space World Bank, and you type in, it'll give you and select the years, and it'll literally generate a spreadsheet. You take the spreadsheet, put it into Excel, and then you can. Oh, no, I don't think it'll be fair. I just think it's hard to apply the trends. What I'm thinking you're trying to tell me is you don't want to do any like mathematical stuff. Yeah, is there any reason though? The problem is that more than welcome to, that isn't what that question is. You have to write that question. The question talks about trends. Training, you have two data points. Like that's the definition of trend. So that's what I tell people. You're more than welcome to do something else. But if you're talking about trend analysis is the analysis But I'm letting you know, I honestly don't mind. So if you want to do that other thing, I'm still going to be separate. I'm just letting you know that isn't more. They're different things. Do you understand what I mean? No, you don't have to do that, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying clearly you're not wanting to do that. That's okay. You can choose, you can just tweak your topic. Write about something else. You're not talking about trends. You're talking about your topic. Yours would be a literature survey of recent studies in relation to microinsurance. That's your topic.
And you think I can just kind of change the topic a bit?
Yeah, remember I said at the very beginning, you guys get to nominate topics. It's entirely up to you guys.
Okay. So if we have to do it that way, how do I modify the topic, for example?
You would just, for example, form a topic that you feel like you can. Easiest thing to do is like to sort of say that maybe your approach is you're applying a qualitative lens to recent analysis of microfinance innovation.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then you put a structure around that because essentially it's a literature review.
It is a literature review.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
I'm gonna put development.
Yeah, so that's fine, but just change it. Don't see what you can't, what you should. The reason I'm telling you this really carefully is because you can't say that you're doing one thing and then you do another thing because you get marked on that in this assignment. Your mark is based on your mandate that you create and then what you say. So if you change your topic, then I'm just going to say anyway. I will send you a full breakdown of that other one. Yeah. I was just a bit concerned. I could tell it was freaking a few people out, so I'll drop it in an email.
Right.
I just Oh, you did?
Yeah, but send it through anyway.
Yeah. No, I'll do it anyway because I
minus the 7 people was getting me on the iPhone.
Yeah, it's just the interval count thing.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Send it through anyway.
Yep, will do. Cheers. So I was going to say, so that's the so just you create a mandate and write to that, and I won't mind. But if you say that you're going to do something and you do something else, I have to mark you against what you said you were going to do.
I'll just modify the topic.
I think it's easier. Yeah, because a lot of people will. It's just, honestly, it's easier to come up with something that you're passionate about anyway, because clearly that's something more interesting. And I think that it'll be interesting. I think it'll be good to read. So, yeah, it's good. Yeah, have you been able to find, did you use SSRN?
Yeah, can I just get up that website and just probably go through and see what they've done?
Yeah, it's probably a good starting point.
I have a problem with this interval. How do I have that?
I'll show you. Well, it was chewing.